All right, great. So, like I said, I'm going to present the IPSA PowerPoint here. I haven't edited the actual slides, but I've just taken a few out just to make this go a little bit faster. Um, I'm not going to touch on a lot on some specific slides. Obviously, like I said, you guys have your books, and so I don't want to bore you to death on some of that stuff. So, with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So our first learning objective is just going to identify the parts of a ladder, including markings and label. I originally deleted this slide, but I added it back in just because I really wanted to briefly share or discuss the different materials that we utilize to make ladders. So in your book, you'll probably notice that we utilize metal, wood, and fiberglass. And so I'm not going to get into the weeds on each material, their advantages or disadvantages. Um, I'll just start off by saying that metal, specifically aluminum, is kind of the material of choice within the American Fire Service. There are some departments, mainly concentrated on the west coast of California, that still utilize wood ladders. So two of the larger departments that I can think of that utilize wood ladders are going to be San Francisco and Los Angeles. Just kind of on side note, if you ever get out to that area and are able to check out their ladders, they're pretty darn cool. So other than that, let's get started with just the different parts of a ladder. So over here to our left, we have a single ladder. And so obviously we have the rungs, which are going to be the main structural member of the ladder that support, or sorry, not the rungs, the beams, sorry. The beams are going to be the main structural member of a ladder that support the rungs. And obviously the rungs are going to be the horizontal pieces of metal that are in between the beams that you're going to utilize to climb. Down here at the bottom, you have what's called the butt, and it also can be referred to as the heel or base. And that's just going to be the bottom of the ladder that's always, the portion of the ladder that's always going to be in contact with either the ground or whatever you choose to set the ladder on. So over to the right, you have, it's another single ladder, but what we call a roof ladder. You'll see that at the top, the big difference between the single ladder on the left and the roof ladder on the right is just those two hooks that you see. And so the hooks are just the curved metal pieces that typically when the ladder is stowed, don't poke out like that. And they are utilize kind of a spring system, and you're just able to push those hooks in, give them a quarter turn, and then they kind of stick out like that. And typically we use this ladder for roof operations, specifically on a pitched roof. So let's see, what else we got? We got a heat sensor label, and so you'll find that every ladder on the inside beam, you're going to find that heat sensor label. We'll talk a little bit more about them here a little bit later, but obviously that's going to be something that you want to check consistently to make sure that it doesn't have any discoloration, which will show or will indicate exposure to heat. Next, we have a picture of what you see as an extension ladder, and also a wooden ladder up top. We'll focus on the extension ladder. So with an extension ladder, you have a bed section and a fly section. The bed section is going to be the section that doesn't move, and the fly section is going to be the section that you're going to be able to raise and lower to different heights, depending on what your target is. So some ladders also have foot pads, and so on the bottom of that, it's typically going to be either rubber or neoprene. Oftentimes, you'll find these foot pads on the bottom of an attic ladder, which we'll show you here in a little bit later. So let's see. This is another an extension ladder. This is a three I guess three-piece extension ladder. So you're going to have what's called a halyard. That's going to be your either rope or cable that you're going to utilize to extend or bring down the fly section. That halyard is going to be attached to a pulley, which is going to be located near the top of the bed section of your ladder. That halyard is just going to be routed through that pulley, and that's, like I said, just going to, again, it's how you're going to be able to extend your fly section and bring it down. The very bottom circular picture, you'll see what's called butt spurs. So this is at the base of your ladder, and they kind of look like spikes. That's going to help you out with stability when you actually go put the ladder onto a building. And so we'll talk about those a little bit later. I'm not going to touch too much on the certifications and warning labels that are on the side of the ladder. The two that I'll focus on here are your electrical hazard warning. All ladders are required to have this, and as we will talk about throughout this presentation tonight, anytime you're dealing with ladders, electricity, electrical wires are a big concern for us. And so you'll find that that warning sticker on every ladder that you have. Again, you have the heat sensor label. Sometimes with these aluminum ladders, the manufacturer has to heat treat them during the manufacturing process. And when they're exposed to any type of heat, sometimes you won't see any outward indication that they've been exposed to heat. Sometimes you might see some bluing, but that's why we have these stickers on here. They're supposed to go from orange to black anytime they've been exposed to a temperature of over 300 degrees. And so again, it's really important to check those as you're going through your ladder checks. And so let's talk about the different types of ladders that we utilize. And so we have single ladders, which are also called straight ladders. And so these are ladders of a fixed length that we utilize. They're going to be like our roof ladders is a good example of that single ladder, but they have a lot of purposes, do a lot of good, but just know that you don't have any leeway in extending the reach of a single ladder. Roof ladders we talked about a little bit. It's a single ladder with hooks on the top, and so like I said, we utilize this ladder a lot when dealing with roof operations on any pitched roof. How the roof ladder works is that those hooks just go right over the very top ridge of a pitched roof until it's stabilized, and it kind of keeps that ladder in place. So folding ladders are often single used for or used for interior attic access, and so you'll see that the ladder that these two firefighters are utilizing actually has the ability to fold in on itself to make it a little more compact. They're obviously a lot smaller and a lot more narrower than the ladders that we're typically going to be climbing. And because of that, sometimes they can feel a little bit unstable when you're actually climbing up and down on them. But great for tight spaces, and like this this picture shows, getting into attic accesses or getting down into a crawl space if you need it. Extension ladders. So extension ladders are great, obviously, because they have the ability to you have the ability to change the reach based upon your desired task. And so they come in some different sizes. Usually the kind of consistent sizes that a lot of fire departments use are the 24-foot ladder, extension ladder, and a 35-foot extension ladder, but you have 28-foot extension ladders. Some departments, I'm not aware of any out here, but again, going back to the West Coast, some ladder trucks actually carry 50-foot extension ladders, and so, but you won't really be seeing that length of ladder here here locally. So combination ladders designed to be self-supporting. So the picture that you see here is a just a what's called a little giant, which is the manufacturer name, but it can be either a A-frame ladder, and you can actually adjust it to make it more of a straight ladder. So these also work great anytime you're trying to make access, let's say, to an attic space or a basement, but it has a lot of other functions. You can utilize it on vehicle extrications, like how they're using it in the picture here, and a lot of different other functions for it. So, okay, let's see. Learning objective 4, we're going to talk about ladder inspection, cleaning, and maintenance. We're just going to briefly talk about some of this. So some of the things that we're looking for, actually stand by, when we're inspecting a ladder, and I should preface this by saying kind of the frequency at which you should be inspecting your ladders. To me, if you're a firefighter and you pull shifts at the fire station, you should be inspecting your ladder at the very beginning of each shift, along with all of your other equipment. And obviously, we're going to go through all these different components of what you need to look for. But a big thing for me, at least at my organization, is not only do we check for these things, we check that it's on the apparatus, but we actually get it off the apparatus and we throw it. We throw it to windows, we throw it to roofs. We make sure that it's going to be functioning appropriately, because you never know when that call will come in and you'll need to utilize it. And so a couple things you're looking for is heat exposure. And so Again, we talked about that a little bit earlier, so make sure you're checking those heat indicating stickers. You want to check the rungs, make sure that they're not cracked, make sure that they're securely attached to the ladder beams. You want to check any welding that's on the ladder and make sure that none of the welds are cracked. Let's see, beams and rungs, again, just make sure that they're all in good condition. And 1 second, I'm going to exit out of this presentation just real quickly and try to get something out of the way here. Perfect. And stand by, I got to plug in my charger real quick.
I can do it.
I got it. Okay, the other things you're looking for are bolts and rivets and points of contact with the apparatus. And so a lot of your ladders will have what are called protection plates, which are just little metal strips that are put onto the ladder just to protect the ladder from areas of chafing where the ladder will frequently come into contact with certain things. And so I'm not exactly sure, I can't remember how you guys stow your ladders on your trucks, but if you stow them kind of on the side of the truck utilizing, let's say, like a hydraulic ladder lift, oftentimes you'll put some protection plates where that ladder is secured just to kind of protect the ladder a little bit more. So we talked a little bit about the direct flame, or I should say the exposure to heat, but also direct flame contact. And so anytime you have that, or anytime those indicating stickers are indicating that it was exposed to heat or direct flame, the ladder really needs to be taken out of service. So I think I used to know this fact, but I believe once an aluminum ladder has been exposed to direct flame, or I think even high heat, I think it at minimum loses, I believe, 25% of its structural stability. So it is a big deal if it's exposed to direct flame or intense heat. Let's talk a little bit about cleaning. So it's pretty easy to clean a ladder. So obviously you want to clean it after each use. And that doesn't mean, you know, going out up to the side of the station and throwing it. You don't need to clean it after that. But oftentimes, anytime after a fire, anytime if you utilize it where it gets dirty, just make sure that it's nice and clean. The protocol for that, just soft brush, running water, and a mild detergent. Once you've washed it, you just want to rinse that down, wipe the ladder dry, and again, you want to look for any damage. And if you find any damage, you want to make sure that it's reported and dealt with promptly. So then also lubricate where needed. Obviously, this is specifically for extension ladders that have moving parts. What we utilize in my organization is just paraffin wax, and so every month or two, I would say, we take the ladders off and then just lubricate any moving parts of that ladder with that paraffin wax, and it makes a world of difference in making sure that that ladder's smooth and efficient and ready to go. Learning objective number 5, so we're going to describe some safety guidelines used when handling ladders. We're also going to explain some considerations taken when selecting, lifting, and lowering ladders. And so a couple things that we should talk about. And so the first thing is develop upper body strength. What I found is that ladders are heavy, and depending on your comfort with them, if you've never thrown a ladder or really kind of worked with a ladder before, you'll probably be a little bit intimidated by the weight of the ladder. Once you get a little bit more comfortable with the ladder, I promise you the weight is not going to feel as bad as it first did when you first picked up that ladder. But saying that, obviously ladders do have some weight associated with them. I believe a 24-foot extension ladder weighs about 72 pounds. And so it does take a little bit of upper body strength to become proficient with throwing ladders. And so if that's something that you find is a weak area, obviously that's something that you should work on. So wear full body harness and safety line. So what this is telling us is that obviously when we're climbing a ladder and when we're more specifically when we're working on a ladder, we need to be secured to the ladder in some fashion. And so we won't talk too much about techniques because obviously that's going to be something that you practice when the practical portion of this academy begins, and probably maybe a few of you are actually practicing it while you're on shift, which would be great. But a couple things you can use if you have any type of harness or weight waist belt with a carabiner. Oftentimes you can just hook that onto a rung when you're working on a ladder. That's going to keep you secured to the ladder. There's also what's called a ladder lock, which you guys will get plenty of practice with. Doesn't require any tools. You just it's a certain technique, and it's all about how you stick your leg through 2 or 3 rungs, and it keeps you attached to the ladder. But just know, anytime you're working on a ladder, you need to be secured to it. Or operate according to your SOPs and guidelines and protocols. And so obviously those are important to know. So know them and be familiar with them. So wear full PPE. That's a big thing. Just to share a quick story with you guys, we were doing some roof work at my station about a week and a half ago, and we threw a 24-foot extension ladder, and we were all off of it and kind of away from it, but a gust of wind, we didn't have the ladder secured, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Just a real light breeze came and actually blew the ladder over, and it came crashing down to the ground. Luckily, nobody was hurt, nobody was underneath it, but that just kind of, those events kind of emphasize the importance of wearing all of your PPE. At minimum, it really should be your fire helmet and gloves. The helmet's going to be your most important thing, because obviously, you know, 72 pounds of an extension ladder, a metal extension ladder coming down on your head is really going to hurt and cause some problems if you're not wearing a helmet. So with that, wear all your personal protective equipment. Choose correct ladder. And so obviously we have different choices on ladders that we can utilize. And so choose the correct ladder for the correct task. Sometimes you might be put into a situation where you might not have a choice to use a certain ladder. Things aren't going to be perfect, but you want to make sure that you're choosing the correct ladder for the task. Use leg muscles when lifting. So I think that's pretty common knowledge. Anytime you're lifting anything, you don't want to use your back. You want to make sure that you're using your leg muscles. So nothing's different with a ladder. Make sure that you're utilizing your lower body to really kind of get that ladder up. Use adequate number of personnel. So this one can be tricky based upon your staffing. Some departments can arrive on a fire scene and have tons of people hopping out of trucks and can devote a lot of people to throwing ladders. My organization is not like that. I don't believe, I'm trying to think, I can't think of a single time where I've ever thrown a ladder on an actual call with a partner. I've always done it by myself. And so there's some challenges to the safety guideline to use adequate number of personnel that you might have to overcome. But if you have the personnel, utilize them. And obviously, as the bigger the ladder you have and the weight increases, you're going to need more people. So typically for a 35-foot ladder, you're going to need 3 people. It's doable. I'm using 2, but obviously if you have that third person, it's absolutely helpful. So and then the last thing here, at least on this slide, is do not raise within 10 feet of electrical wires. This is going to be a repetitive thing, as I said. Electricity is not our friend, specifically when we're dealing with aluminum ladders that are conductive. And so you need to stay at a minimum of 10 feet away from any electrical wires. I can't emphasize that enough. We just talked a little bit about that. Some more guidelines: secure the tip and anchor the foot. So that story that I just told you to provide that example, we didn't secure the tip. We didn't secure the ladder at all, and it blew over. And so that was our fault, and we should have secured it better. So anytime you throw a ladder and you have the ability to secure the tip, absolutely do it. Sometimes you might not have that ability depending on the scene that you're on, but anytime you have the chance, go ahead and do it. Also, you need to foot the ladder anytime that somebody's climbing up. Obviously, this is another challenging thing where if I'm throwing this 24-foot ladder by myself for a victim rescue from a window, and I'm working by myself, I'm not going to have somebody to foot the ladder for me. So again, there's some challenges. I think we all realize that, but anytime you have the staffing and you're working with a partner, that ladder needs to be footed. And if you don't know what footed means, I'll explain it here a little bit later in this presentation. Grasp the extension beams. So this is specifically talking about when you're either raising or lowering the fly section of a metal. you want to make sure that when you're grasping the ladder, that your hands are grasping the beams and not the rungs, because obviously if you have any fingers or hands holding those beams as that fly section's coming down, it's a good way to lose a finger or injure your hand. And so make sure, something that we always do, that I was always taught when I went through academy, is before that fly section comes down, you verbalize, okay, fly section coming down, fingers and toes clear. And then you get a verbal response from whoever you're working with, just as a reminder, hey, keep that area clear and safe. Check for proper angle. So typically the proper climbing angle for a ladder is going to be 70 to 75 degrees. There's an easy way to check the angle of the ladder, which you'll be taught during academy, but you'll quickly realize that you want to check the angle prior to actually climbing the ladder. But once you start climbing the ladder, you'll be able to quickly gain a feel as to whether the ladder is actually at a proper angle or if it's not. So again, 70 to 75 degrees is your optimal ladder angle. Based on your terrain, based on your building, based on your circumstance, you might not always be able to get that 70 to 75 degrees, but that's optimal. Let's see, ensure hooks of the pawls seated over rungs. And so one thing that now I'm just realizing that we didn't go over when we were talking about ladder parts is every extension ladder has what's called pawls. Oftentimes they're either called dogs or locks. I usually call them dogs or locks myself, but that's the two devices within an extension ladder that's going to secure the fly section after you have raised it. And so anytime after you've raised the fly section, you want to make sure that those dogs, those locks are actually locked in place, because if they're not, the fly section is going to come crashing down upon you. So again, that's something that I was taught to verbalize. Once the fly section is in the area where it needs to be, you verbalize, or the dog's locked, or the lock's locked, and then your partner can say, yes, dogs are locked, locks are locked, and then that gives you a little peace of mind to make sure that those are locked. Ensure stability before climbing. Obviously, depending on your terrain and your buildings, stability might be an issue, and so obviously you want to make sure that wherever you throw that ladder, that it has a stable ground to sit upon, because if it's not stable and you start to climb it, obviously it has a very great potential of tipping over and hurting yourself. So just make sure that you're on stable ground. Use caution when moving sideways. So Mark will talk about in his presentation how you can actually move a ladder from let's say an extension ladder, from when the extension ladder is completely bedded or extended. There are ways to move it, but you just need to use caution. Obviously, if the fly section of an extension ladder is fully extended and you need to move that ladder, it's going to come with some challenges. And so really kind of the safest thing to do is to bring the fly section down and then move it, but sometimes time is of the essence and you're not able to do that. So Mark will talk about kind of how to move a ladder effectively once it's actually thrown and up against the building. Let's see, climb smoothly and rhythmically. You'll find that when you are a firefighter and you're in full gear and you're climbing this ladder, sometimes they can have a lot of bounce to them. And just imagine if you weigh, let's say, 250 pounds, you throw on 100 pounds of gear, and you're going up to make a victim rescue, and now you've added a victim to your ladder. That's a lot of weight on that ladder, so it is going to move. So you really want to try to climb as smooth as possible and as rhythmic as possible. Also, don't overload a ladder. On the sides of the ladder, every ladder should have their rated capacity, and so you should be aware of that rated capacity. Typically, it's going to be 750 pounds, which accounts for 2 firefighters in full gear and also a victim. And so you don't want to overload that ladder whatsoever. Now, the ladders do have a safety factor to them, typically a 4-to-1 safety factor. And what that means is that, a 24-foot extension ladder, when it's standing perfectly erect, can actually hold 2,000 pounds, but that's a static weight. The second you turn that static weight into a dynamic weight, it loses some of that weight rating. And so just make sure that you don't overload that ladder. Typically, like I said, it's going to be 750 pounds. A couple things in terms of securing yourself to the ladder. So I already talked about you can use a leg lock to secure yourself to the ladder when you're working on the ladder, which works great. Again, it doesn't require any equipment whatsoever. And once you're in that ladder lock, you still have quite a bit of mobility to accomplish whatever task that you're working on. Relocate only when ordered. I would change that to relocate only when needed. So once the ladder's in place, again, I mean, you don't necessarily want to relocate it, but things happen, you might have to relocate it. So use for intended purpose only, inspect for damage, wear after use, and secure foot of an unattended ladder to a stationary object. We have a warning here. It just says sliding down a ladder, either feet first or head first, even in an emergency, is unsafe and may result in serious injury or death. Obviously, when we are climbing the ladder, whether we're ascending or descending, we are going to be, again, climbing smoothly. We're going to be climbing rhythmically, and we're not going to be, at the top thinking this thing's a slide and going to be sliding down the rails to the bottom. That's a very quick way to get yourself injured. Under certain circumstances, we do teach it is okay to slide down a ladder, and specifically a scenario that I can give you is when a ladder has been extended to, let's say, a second floor window, and you have firefighters working within a compartment, and let's say that compartment is pre-flashover and they need to make a quick exit out of the building. There is a technique called a bailout, which will require you to bail headfirst out the window, lock yourself onto the ladder utilizing your arm, and then turning your body so that way you're feet first, and then you slide down the ladder. So there are certain circumstances where you're going to have to do that, but again, it's not the safest way, and that's not what we should be doing on a normal basis. A couple other safety guidelines: raise safely and smoothly. Speed may be required. So again, with ladders, oftentimes time can be of the essence. And so obviously when you need to complete a task with some speed, with quickness, you want to make sure that you are completely comfortable with that task prior to having to actually have to perform that task. And so making sure that you're confident, you're comfortable, and you're proficient with ladders is really key, because you might be put into a situation where you have to throw a ladder very, very quickly. Teamwork is also important. When you are working with a team member or a partner or a crew of 3, and you've been tasked with throwing a ladder, it's really important for all of you to be on the same page, because it's very evident when you try to throw it and let's say 2 or 3 people are not on the same page, because the ladder throw will not be effective or efficient whatsoever. So really the big thing that I can tell you to do is train together and work together, so that way you guys kind of have that unconscious competence that you're able to throw the ladder without really thinking about it. And also, if you're working with a partner or a crew, you all are on the same page and know exactly what needs to be done with very little communication. Let's see, the IC considers several factors when deciding where to place the ladder. And so this always might not be the incident commander's decision. You might be tasked, I as an incident commander might show up, and if I have 2 backseat firefighters with me and I see somebody that needs, let's say, or multiple people that need rescue from a window, I might just say, hey, you guys are assigned to perform victim rescue from those windows. I might not, as an incident commander, give much direction at all to where the ladder is placed. So what I really emphasize, at least with my firefighters, is that you all be thinking firefighters, that if you're given a task, I'm familiar with the ladder, I'm familiar with where it needs to position for what specific task, and you're able to do that with very little direction. Other factors that would be considered are the ladders that you have available. You might show up to a residence within your within Timberline's district, and you might have a victim hanging out a window of, let's say, a sill that's 35 feet above the ground, and you might show up with an engine that only has a 24-foot ladder. So obviously, the 24-foot ladder is not going to reach, so you are going to be a little bit hampered with what ladders you have available to you on scene. Obviously, you're going to want to choose the right ladder for the assigned task. Location of overhead obstructions, again, you're always on the lookout for any type of overhead power lines, okay? Anytime before I throw a ladder, again, I'm very big on verbalizing, because that makes, if I'm working with a partner, now my partner knows that I'm looking for certain things, specifically overhead obstructions that are safety issues, and that also forces them to look for the same things. And so anytime before you throw a ladder up, you want to look for those overhead obstructions. Structural features of the building. Sometimes throwing a ladder is not pretty. Oftentimes you have to improvise based upon the structure where you're throwing it. And so knowing structural features of the building, doing pre-plans, going out within your district and actually throwing ladders to the buildings where you might actually have to throw ladders in emergency is a really good thing in terms of training and being prepared for an incident where you might have to do that. And so just know that certain structural features on buildings can absolutely impact and influence your I guess ability to throw a ladder. Wind direction, velocity, again, it doesn't take much to blow these ladders over. So again, you want to make sure that you can secure these ladders as much as possible. And topography of area. Again, we talked a little bit about the importance of throwing your ladder on a stable ground. And so the ground and the topography of around a building where you might be throwing it, again, might heavily influence where you're actually able to throw a ladder. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in Mark's presentation. So other things about ladder selection that's important. So anytime we're working on a roof or any type of upper story, at minimum, we should have two means of escape. And so if I and my crew is tasked to go conduct some roof operations, I want to make sure, and we have to throw a ladder to do that, I want to make sure that I have at minimum two ladders on different parts of the building. So that way, if something happens to, something happens with the fire conditions that impede my access to the ladder where we originally made access to the roof, I have a secondary option of where to go. So as a firefighter, as an incident commander, as an officer, you have in throwing ladders, it requires the ability to judge distances. And so know your averages for residential and commercial story. Typically, what I always taught was the typical height of a residential home is going to be around 9 feet, and the typical height of one story for a commercial occupancy is going to be 12 feet, with a windowsill, at least for residential, about 3 feet above the ground. So that's kind of a rule of thumb. It really does change. So you really kind of have to master the skill of being able to judge certain distances and what ladder will be required for specific distances. One thing that I found helpful and something that I do with my crew consistently, and certainly you guys can do while you're on shift or you have any type of training within your district, is if you guys are working on ladders, see if you can go to, maybe a firefighter that lives in district, maybe you could go to their house and throw some ladders. Maybe you can contact a business owner and see if you guys can come out and throw some ladders on their building. We have some target hazards within my jurisdiction where I take my crew out and we actually throw ladders, because when the emergency happens and when we need to utilize these ladders, we're not guessing as to, oh gosh, I think that window requires a 24-foot ladder or a 28-foot ladder. We've done it before, and so that really kind of helps our game plan and our ability to mitigate the incident. Now, obviously, you can't throw ladders to every building in your district, but I'm just saying as a recommendation, that's a really good thing to do. Couple more guidelines, and so the picture on the left here you see is an extension ladder that's being used for a crew to access the roof. So when you're accessing the roof, you want to extend the ladder beyond the roof edge. Now I believe the IFSTA book will say that you need to extend it 3 to 5 rungs above the roof line. I've always been under the opinion and the impression that the more rungs that you can get over that roof line, the better, because obviously, this picture was taken in perfect conditions. It looks to be a sunny day. There's no smoke. It's not an emergency scene, so everything seems to be pretty relaxed. On an actual fire scene, when you're on a roof, you might not have great visibility. You might have smoke coming up where you can't really see very well. So one, extending a max amount of rungs over that roof edge helps with actually you transitioning from climbing the ladder and getting onto the roof. But it also helps you find the ladder under difficult conditions and smoke conditions. The middle picture here, you can see it's another extension ladder, and it is extended into the side of a window. So this is how you're gonna want to go ahead and throw your ladder in case you are in the event that you are tasked with ventilating a window. So you're typically not want to be your ladder right in front of the ladder, in front of the window. When you're ventilating, you usually want it on the windward side, so that way when you break the window, you don't have glass kind of blowing at you. And again, obviously, when you're breaking glass, all these items, the glass, window sashes, all that stuff is going to be either going into the building or coming out. So you don't want to put yourself underneath it. And in terms of climbing that ladder, you're going to want to try to be at the highest position of that fly section. So again, you're above everything that you're breaking. And then the last picture here is for victim rescue from a window. So as you can see, the very tip of that ladder is going to be right below the windowsill. That's going to be exactly where you want it. Obviously, I think the standard residential window in terms of size is going to be about 30 inches wide. And when you get a big firefighter with all their gear on and they're trying to get a victim through the window, you don't have a lot of width and a lot of space to get not only yourself out but the victim out. So you don't want to have any portions of those of the ladder inside of the window, because again, all you're doing if you do that is just decreasing your space. So you just want to make sure that it's right under the windowsill, so you have entire access and ability to use that entire area. A ladder's reach is not the same as the designated length. So I've mentioned a few lengths of ladders before. Okay, so you have with extension ladders, you have 24-foot extension ladders, 28-foot extension ladders, 35-foot extension ladders. That doesn't mean that a 35-foot ladder will be able to get you 35 feet above ground. And as you can see, the very bottom two squares here, lengths of 35 feet or less, you have a reach of 1 foot or less. Okay, so then lengths over 35 feet, 2 feet or less. And so what that means is that if I have a 24-foot extension ladder, I throw it to the bottom of a windowsill for a victim rescue, I only really have 23 feet of reach. And that's obviously at optimal climbing angle. I might have a little less if I can't get that optimal climbing angle. We talked about this a little bit. Use proper lifting and lowering techniques to prevent personal injuries. So again, if you're dealing with like a 35-foot ladder or larger, you want to make sure that you have the correct number of personnel assisting you with throwing that ladder. Again, common knowledge, common sense, anytime you're lifting up a load, you want to bend at your knees, keep your back straight and lift with your legs, not with your back and arms. It's a very quick way to injure your back. Lift on command, a firefighter who can see all team members. So typically when you're throwing a ladder and you're working with a team, whether it's a crew of 2 or a crew of 3, there's going to be one person in charge of actually that task. And so that person's going to basically be calling out commands and they need to be able to see everything, so that way they can look out for hazards, and only lift on the command of whoever's in charge. If you are not in command and the person that is in command asks, is everybody ready to lift, and you are not ready, make sure you verbalize that, because if you're not ready and everybody else lifts, you're setting yourself up for injury. And then reverse lifting if necessary to lower. Okay. And I'm sorry, I feel like I'm going a little too fast for you guys. I'll pause right here. Does anybody have any questions so far?
I just have one question on that last part, as far as like being, I guess, in command of calling out when you guys are lifting. Is there like a designated person depending on where you're lifting at? Like if you're at the head of the ladder, are you the one calling commands, or is it just kind of whoever calls it?
Sometimes I'll say it depends on your department SOGs, but typically, and I think what the IFSTA book says is that ladders, when you're working as a team of two, typically the butt of the ladder is going to be pointing towards your target, and then the person that's going to be at the back, so basically the person that is holding the tip, I believe the book says that's the person in charge, because I think they have the ability to see a little bit better maybe than the person in the front. But I've also done it differently. I've also been at the butt of the ladder, and I've been the one calling the shots. And so, Mark, I don't know if you have a better answer to that, but to me, I think it really comes down to what your department requires, and just being on the same page with the people that you're working with. Mark, I'll allow you to chime in if you'd like.
Yeah, that's a good question. Up until the 5th edition, that was the correct answer. I don't think there's any language in the 6th edition that indicates which position is, for testing purposes, calls the shots. And I would echo Stoughton that usually the rear of the ladder, or in the case of movement, the tips typically call the shots. However, as soon as the ladder's raised, it's typically that person that doesn't have the best advantage, depending on the arrangement of how the ladder falls against the building. So similar to Stoughton, I just add to that, whoever has the best vantage point to make the most appropriate next move decisions is the person who should be calling the shots.
Great. Are there any other questions?
I just had one about victim rescue.
Yeah.
Is it like helping to carry some victims, or is it coaching them down the ladder? Like, how do you usually do victim rescue?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we'll touch on it a little bit later in this presentation, but just to kind of give you an answer now, it really kind of depends on your circumstance. It depends on the size of your victim. It depends on whether your victim is conscious or unconscious. If your victim is conscious and they have the ability to climb down the ladder themselves, that's a scenario where we absolutely would coach them through climbing down the ladder. But we're also going to be, and I'll show you kind of the position that we'd be in for bringing a conscious victim down the ladder. But we're going to be basically below them on the ladder, and we're going to have the ability to, whether they slip, whether they freak out, we have the ability to kind of push them against the ladder to secure them just in case that happens. Now, in terms of an unconscious victim, there's a couple of different techniques that you can utilize to bring them down the ladder. Oftentimes, depending on their size, it might be challenging to actually get them out the window. And typically, you know, you're not responding to house fires with the lightest people in the world. So you can kind of expect that you're going to be working if you have to lift an unconscious victim to a window. It's going to be a lot of work, and you might need multiple team members within that room to actually get them out the window. So with lighter victims and specifically children, oftentimes you can actually cradle them going down a ladder. But we'll show you, there's a few slides here a little bit later that shows you some of the techniques on how to bring them down the ladder. So
Awesome, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? All right, great. Well, I'll keep going here. Just check my time, make sure. Do you get, well, it's pretty close to 7. You guys want to take a quick break? Mark or Captain Johnson, you guys want to take a quick break or?
Yeah, why don't we take 5? I'll
Okay,
be back at
yep.
7:05. It should give everyone 8 minutes,
Great, sounds good.
7 minutes.
Stan, are you still at your computer?
Yes, I am.
I'm gonna take the screen from you for just a second. I want to
Okay.
test something out.
Okay.
Can you hear that by chance?
I can't hear it, no.
Your volume go?
Hey, Mark, I talked to the GoToMeeting people the other day, and there's no way to get audio right now through our current platform.
Oh, okay.
We're meeting on Monday virtually with them to look at some other options, so we're kind of
Okay.
in the water at this point. Sorry, man.
No, you're good.
I've sold like
Try something else real quick. Test. 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 Test.
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, let me try something real quick.
Uh-oh.
It's really strange. Oh, I see what's going on here. Could you hear any of that audio?
Negative.
Okay, that's really strange. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Let me hand it back over. All right, Stan, back to you.
Cool, thanks.
All right, if you could just chime in on the chat that you're here, we'll get started once we have everyone.
I'm back.
Bib's back.
All right, we got everyone. All right, sounds good. Go ahead and take it away.
All right. Cool. So our next learning objective is just to describe various methods for ladder carries. Some of the information we need to know, obviously the types, lengths, and location on your apparatus. Be very familiar with the ladder complement that you have at Timberline and how those ladders are stored on your trucks. And so nested ladders, how to remove and order and interact. Sometimes, depending on the truck, you might have two ladders which are nested together. So it's important to remember how and what order they're stored and how they come off, specifically when you're trying to put them back. Location of mounting brackets for vertically mounted. Anytime you have some mounting brackets on a truck that are used to secure a ladder, oftentimes it's helpful to just put some tape on it so that way you know exactly where the brackets are from or go. Method used to secure, obviously you need to be familiar with that, and whether if you have an extension ladder, whether you keep the ladder stored with the fly section in or fly section out. So all things that are important for you to know. Let's see, so this is the one firefighter low shoulder carry, and so this is a pretty versatile carry, and so obviously the firefighter here in the picture is carrying a roof ladder, and so how that is just that they have the arm through both I guess a set of rungs through both beams, and they're going to carry that ladder to whatever their objective is. And so you can also utilize this carry for extension ladders. It's not just for single and roof ladders, and you can also utilize this carry while working as a team. So it's pretty versatile. We have a caution slide. So carrying the forward end of a ladder at eye level impedes the carrier's balance and visibility and increases the risk of butt spurs striking someone else in the head. So what that means is that when you are carrying a ladder, typically the butt end of that ladder is going to be in front of you. And so how you carry it, typically you'll actually make sure that that butt end is kind of pointed towards the ground. So that way, if you do run into somebody, you're not running into their face with the bottom of the ladder. Also, the other benefit of that is you have better visibility. Obviously, when you're carrying a ladder, you want to be able to see what's in front of you. And so keeping that ladder, the butt of the ladder down in front of you is going to be really helpful for you. And then here's the two firefighter low shoulder carry. Again, it can be used for single and roof ladders and extension ladders. So this is the three firefighter flat shoulder carry.
Test.
I guess this is these are important slides in terms of a test I'm hearing. So three firefighter flat shoulder carry. So this is typically going to be used when you're working, obviously, as a crew of three with and you're transporting or moving a heavier ladder. So typically it's going to be like a 35-foot extension ladder. Now again, the more proficient and more confident you feel with ladders, a 35-foot can be thrown by two people utilizing a different technique, but just know that I wouldn't recommend those techniques until you get comfortable doing it like this. So you have the three firefighter flat arm, three and four firefighter flat arms length carry. Begins with the fly section up. So again, this is going to be used when you are moving and working with heavier ladders. And this is going to be the four firefighter flat shoulder carry, similar to the picture that we just saw of the three firefighters carrying that ladder. It's just you add another person. You have one at each corner. Pretty easy way to move a ladder that has some weight to it. Two firefighter arms length carry. I think the book IFSA calls this an arm's length carry. I've always known this carry as just a suitcase carry. It's beneficial to utilize when you are working as a member of a team, but it also can be beneficial when you're by yourself. And also when you're by yourself and you have to carry more than one ladder at a time. Let's say you have a 24-foot extension ladder on your right side and then a roof ladder on the left. You can find the balance point of that ladder, carry both of them up like a suitcase, and carry them to your objective. So some general procedures used to carry roof ladders. And so a roof ladder, like I said before, the majority of ladders are carried with the butt end of the ladder in the forward position in front of you. But with a roof ladder, it's a little different just because of how you're going to utilize that roof ladder. So you can actually carry it with the butt forward in a forward position or the tip in the forward position. So based upon how you're carrying it will just kind of change how you actually get it thrown onto the roof ladder. So, or sorry, onto the roof, I should say. Basic considerations and requirements for ground ladder placement. And so ladder placement responsibilities are often shared by different personnel. So you might have an officer or an incident commander that designates the location where a ladder needs to be taken and the task that that ladder needs to carry out. You can have personnel below the officer rank that are relied upon to decide the exact spot or sometimes the task. Typically, it's going to be the spot. Just remember to follow department SOPs and how you guys typically operate. But like I said, I'm a big fan of thinking firefighters. And if you have firefighters that can show up to scene, are given a quick task, and are able to grab a ladder and put it where it needs to be, it's fantastic. Two objectives when placing a ground ladder. Again, properly for intended use. You want to make sure that you're utilizing it in the manner that it's designed. And then also the proper distance from building for a safe, easy climb. So again, I said previously that the desired angle, climbing angle that you want to shoot for is 70 to 75 degrees. Again, sometimes it's not possible depending on the circumstance in which you find yourself in. And I think I'll give you guys a little quick equation that you can utilize in your mind as you're walking up to your target, and that'll help you figure out how far away the butt end of the ladder needs to be away from the building in order to get that proper climbing angle. Position is going to be based on the task that you're given. So again, as we already talked about, different tasks, whether it's roof access, ventilation from a window, or victim rescue from a window, you're going to have to throw the ladder not in different ways, but the ladder's going to have to be placed in different locations based upon your task. So other guidelines that are important: place at 2 points, different sides of building. Again, anytime, to give an example, while you're working on a roof, you want to have 2 areas of egress, just in case something happens to your first exit point, you have a backup. When you're throwing a ladder, obviously we've already talked about the ladder's ability to absorb heat. It doesn't have a great ability, so you want to avoid exposure to heat or direct flame contact. And you want to take advantage of construction strong points. And so you'll see as you start throwing these ladders against actual buildings, you'll start to kind of get a good idea of one, how buildings are made, what materials are good to utilize when you're throwing a ladder against it, and what materials are not so great. So you want to take advantage of the building construction that you have. In terms of ventilating from a window, or ventilating from a window, typically you'll throw the ladder, you'll raise it directly in front of a window to support a smoke ejector, which is typically acts like a fan. Again, you want to avoid contact with any overhead obstructions and avoid uneven terrain or soft spots. Sometimes soft spots can work in your favor. Obviously, if you're throwing a ladder in a grassy yard, that's actually going to be really great, because once you put some weight on that ladder, it's going to stabilize the ladder more. Sometimes you might have a hard surface like concrete that doesn't work out very well. That you'll find that once you throw that ladder, the butt end of your ladder is not very stable, and it tends to slide on concrete. So making sure that you're throwing that ladder on as even terrain as possible, and then just knowing kind of what materials work well with throwing a ladder, and specifically materials that'll secure that ladder at the base. You really want to avoid in front of doors or other paths of travel. You got to remember that people are going to be coming in and out of those doors. And if you throw a ladder right in front of, let's say, a front door of a building where, let's say, we have fire operations going on, you're really just kind of asking for that ladder to be knocked over. And again, it's going to impede our access and anybody that's trying to utilize that door. So you really want to make sure that those ladders are not thrown in front of doors. You want to avoid top of sidewalk, elevator trap doors, sidewalk deadlights, any type of manhole covers, anything that has the potential to not be stable. You just want to avoid at all costs. And then do not place against unstable walls or surfaces. All right, so here's our picture of our extension ladder that's up making roof access to a building. And as you can see, this is going to be at a 75-degree climbing angle. So a quick way and an equation that you can do in your head to determine how far the butt end of the ladder has to be away from the building, the base of the building, to get that proper climbing angle, is you want to estimate the height of your object. And in this case, this is the building. So if you have a building where the tip of that roof is going to be 20 feet tall, and that's you obviously need to get to that 20 feet, just take 20 feet divided by 4, which is going to equal 5 feet, and that's approximately how much space you want to have between the building and the butt of the ladder. So it's a pretty good equation. It works really well, but obviously To me, estimating kind of climbing angles and whatnot, it's very much kind of a comfort thing. You got to get out and practice actually throwing these ladders, and then you can kind of get a really good feel as to how far the ladder needs to be away from the building to obtain a good climbing angle. Any questions on those things so far? Okay. We'll go into our next learning objective, which is to describe various methods of ladder raises. And so ladder raises require teamwork, smoothness, and rhythm. So it does depend on the type and size of your ladder, the number of personnel available. Again, I'll say you really want to get good with throwing ladders and working as a member of team, being on the same page with your team in terms of throwing the ladder. But eventually, you're really going to have to get good at throwing that ladder by yourself. Just due to short staffing, limited staffing, you might not have all the people in the world to dedicate to a ladder throw. So that's something that obviously you'll work up to, is getting comfortable throwing it by yourself. Weather conditions play a factor. Obviously, if it's a rainy or snowy day, that's going to impact, I guess, the slipperiness, I don't even know if that's a word, of the ground that you're throwing the ladder. That's going to be the base of your ladder. In snowy conditions, if the rungs of a metal ladder are any way wet in any form or icy, that creates a pretty big slip hazard, and it's really easy to slip off one of those rungs. And so weather conditions play a factor. Wind also, if it's a super windy day, it's going to be a little bit more challenging to throw the ladders, and that's really where it comes, the importance of securing those ladders once they're thrown comes into play. And then topography conditions, again, topography plays a huge role in where you're able to actually throw ladders. The transition from ladder carry to raise should be done in one smooth motion. Again, I don't really feel like I can verbalize that really well via webinar. I think that's something that you guys will learn when you actually get out there and start throwing ladders. But again, from your carry position to when you throw it against the building, again, a lot of it relies on competence and confidence. Once you get those things, these things should be really a smooth transition. It should all work in one. Again, here's another slide concerning electricity. Anytime you are throwing a ladder, identify electrical hazards. Be looking above you, be looking to the side of you, making sure that if you see any hazards whatsoever, that you're verbalizing it, that you're calling it out. Even if you're working by yourself, verbalize it and call it out, so that way you kind of know, you stay on top of your game. And I think there's something to not only thinking about it, but verbalizing it. You almost hear yourself say it. So I think that certainly helps increase the safety of the scene. So look up before lifting, look up before you bring the ladder back down. Always be looking up for any type of hazards. So several considerations must be addressed before raising a ladder. And so let me just take a look at this next page here. I think what the IPSA presentation here is getting at is whether you throw the ladder with the fly section on an extension ladder with the fly section out or fly section in. Typically within the fire service, it's been common for when you're throwing a metal ladder that when you raise it and put it against the building, that the fly section is out. Wooden ladders are actually different. They're the opposite. The fly section is going to be in, so towards the building. But I will say, and I won't say too much about it because I know Mark's going to talk about it. It is acceptable to throw a ladder, a metal ladder with the fly section in. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're following your department's standard operating guidelines. If they absolutely say you can't do it, then probably you should follow those guidelines. And obviously, you want to check with the manufacturer, but that's just a little taste of the discussion that we'll have a little bit here with Mark in terms of fly in and fly out. The other thing that this picture is trying to show is securing the halyard. And again, the halyard is going to be either the rope or cable used to extend the fly section, to raise and lower the fly section. How we do this is that once the fly section is raised and it's at the proper height that we want it, we're going to go ahead and take that halyard, utilizing a clove hitch with an overhand safety knot, we're going to go ahead and tie that halyard off to the ladder rungs. And this acts as kind of a fail-safe just in case your dogs or your locks on the extension, the bed portion of your extension ladder fail. If they do fail, you'll at least have the halyard tied off, so that way the fly shouldn't come in crashing down. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in Mark's presentation too, I believe. One firefighter raise can be used for both single and extension ladders. Again, there's different ways to throw these ladders. I'm not going to get too much into trying to describe how to throw them. To me, this is best learned on the actual training ground. But again, you can one firefighter can raise a single ladder and also an extension ladder. Again, these two pictures just demonstrate two different ways where how two people can raise a ladder. The picture on the left is a beam raise. The picture on the right is the flat raise. Again, you guys will get real accustomed to both of those, and they're good for different things on the fire ground depending on your circumstance. Three firefighter flat raise can be used for heavier loads. So again, this looks to be a heavier ladder, so you might need 3 people to lift it. And so there are certain techniques that you can utilize to put those ladders in place. 4 firefighter flat raise can be used for heavier extension ladders. Again, if you're dealing with really heavy ladders, the more people you have, the better. I'll talk just briefly again about upper body strength and lower body strength. If that's something that you find is your weakness, you really need to do what you can to improve that, because again, ladders can be heavy. But the good news is a lot of what throwing ladders is based a lot on technique. You don't have to be the strongest person in the world in order to throw a 24-foot extension ladder. You just have to have a little strength, but once you learn the techniques and you get comfortable with it, you'll see that it's not as challenging as it might seem at this point. A number of ways a roof ladder can be deployed. So again, the purpose of a roof ladder is to for when we are working on the roof of a pitched roof. And so as you can see, you're going to have to go ahead and throw an extension ladder to the roof, and then you're going to have to carry that roof ladder up with you. So I won't really talk too much about, again, how to do that. You will learn on the training ground how to do that effectively. So any questions so far? I think we're getting close to wrapping up my presentation here. Okay. Hearing none, we'll keep going. So compare procedures for moving ground ladders. And so this slide says 2 firefighters are required to pivot a ladder when needed. That may be what IFSA says, and that may be the safest practice or the best practice, but I'll tell you, it doesn't always take 2 firefighters to pivot a ladder, and I think Mark will talk about this as well. You can pivot a ladder with just 1 person. Again, knowing how to do it, knowing the proper techniques on how to do it is really key. Shifting raised ground ladders should be limited to short distances. Obviously, if you're working with an extension ladder, you have the fly section fully extended. You don't want to be moving that ladder around too much, because since it is fully extended, it's not going to be as stable. So you can move it, to the left or to the right. You can move it some short distances, but if you are having to move a fully extended extension ladder to a far location, your best bet is to actually just bring that fly section down, move it to the new location, and then raise it again. Explain the methods to use secure ladders. We'll just go over this briefly. So there's 2 big ways: heeling, which is also called footing the ladder, and tying in. Heeling and footing the ladder is going to be something that is pretty common. What that's going to look like, and I'm not sure. Yeah, here we go. Here's a picture of footing and heeling the ladder. So again, what that's going to look like is that you have 1 firefighter at the base of your ladder, securing that ladder to or keeping it in its position so that way it doesn't slide in or out. So there are 2 main ways to do this. The picture that you see at the left, you have the firefighter grasping both rails, and he's underneath the ladder, basically applying pressure towards the building to keep that ladder in place. The picture on your right is a firefighter that has, as you can see, it has at least one or two feet on the butt of that ladder. And again, they're doing the exact same thing as the firefighter on the left. They're just making sure that that ladder stays in position. This is really key when you have a ladder that's thrown on a ground like concrete that might not be the best in terms of stability. You really need to have somebody at the bottom of that ladder, depending on your topography and your ground, to secure that ladder. It's not going to be fun when somebody's climbing up that ladder, nobody's footing it, and it slips and that firefighter falls. There's tons of YouTube videos out there that you can watch of firefighters falling. And again, what I say is not, it's not the Bible, you know what I mean? Like, depending on your circumstance, you might have to change things up. Based off of these two techniques, I'm much more, and this is my personal opinion, I'm much more of a fan of how the firefighter is doing it on the right, just because I think they have a better ability to kind of watch what's going on with the building and anybody that might be climbing up or down that ladder. I've never really been a big fan of the version on the left, just because one, it takes away your ability to kind of see the scene. And two, if anything falls from, let's say, that window, whether it be glass, whether it be a person, whatever it might be, you're really kind of directly underneath the ladder. And let's say the ladder slips, that ladder and any weight that's on it is going to come down on you. So again, that's just my personal opinion. These are both acceptable ways to do this. If Timberline has an SOG that says do one way or the other, obviously follow that. Here's a picture of just how to tie a ladder off. And this is done with a piece of rope. Typically, can you turn on the light? Typically, this can be done. I usually utilize just a piece of webbing that I keep in my turnout gear to just quickly secure it to something if possible. Sometimes you're not going to have something to secure it with, but obviously anytime I have the ability to secure it, I will. And you guys will learn that on the training ground. Describe ladder climbing considerations. So again, we've already talked about, you want to climb it smoothly, you want to climb it rhythmically. You want to ascend with the least amount of bounce and sway as possible. You want to climb after your angle is checked and the ladder secured. And you want to use your arms and hands, obviously, to stop your fall if your feet slip. Now, one of the things that I was taught is when you were climbing a ladder, obviously our fire boots are pretty thick. And right kind of at the forefront of the heel, you should have a pretty big or a pretty thick piece of rubber or leather on the bottom of your boot. That's kind of the piece of your foot that you want in contact with the ladder rungs. It's really bad kind of technique and form to climb a ladder or descend a ladder on your tiptoes or anywhere kind of utilizing the front portion of your boot, because like I said, if that rung is slippery in any way, it's very easy to kind of slip and fall off that ladder. Climb using your leg muscles, practice climbing slowly to develop form. Again, a lot of these things with ladders is just your training and your comfort and your confidence with ladders. So, and then just know also you may be required to carry equipment up and down. Not only might you have to carry victims down, but if you're going to the roof, you're going to have to carry hooks with you. You're going to have to carry saws with you. You might have to carry some other things. And so there are techniques on how to carry equipment up a ladder safely. Obviously, you'll learn those hopefully in a few weeks. Indicate what methods can be used to work from a ladder. So again, there's going to be situations where you're actually going to have to be on a ladder and working from a ladder. I believe the picture here appears that this firefighter is bringing a section of hose up a ladder with him. You might be in a situation where you might actually have to perform fire attack on a ladder. I don't really necessarily like that. I've done it before, but just know that there are techniques that you can utilize to secure yourself when you're working on a ladder. We touched on this a little bit earlier. Just do not exceed the rate load capacity of the ladder. And I think, to me, that this is kind of an old standard, at least one firefighter on each section of a ladder at the same time. Again, typically your weight rating is going to be 750 pounds. And so to me, it's acceptable to have 2 firefighters on the same section at a time. And I think Mark will touch on that in his presentation. But overall, just know the working limits of your ladder and don't exceed those limits. Here you can see a firefighter that's going to be working on a ladder, and he is utilizing just a waist harness to secure himself to the ladder, which is fine. Here we talk about a leg lock. So I mentioned it before. It's a technique that doesn't require any tools. You just stick either your right leg or your left leg inside a rung, and then you wrap your foot over a beam, and it secures you to the ladder. And again, it gives you quite a bit of mobility to work off that ladder. Leg locks are only used from ground ladders. Obviously, you're not going to be utilizing them if you're working on any type of aerial, because the aerial obviously has the ability to extend and retract while somebody is on it. And so it's pretty obvious why you would not want to lock your leg in a aerial ladder that has the ability to extend and retract while you're on it. Any questions? I think we've got maybe 5 more slides. Okay, last few slides here. So explain methods used for assisting a victim down a ladder. So when you're performing a victim rescue, again, you want to make sure from a window, you want to make sure that the tip is raised to just below the sill. You want to maximize that area of your window as much as possible to get not only yourself out, but the victim. Let's see. Protect occupants from slipping and falling. Let's see. Here's some pictures of what it'll kind of look like. So the picture on the left, you see a firefighter bringing a conscious victim down. Now, what this typically looks like is that you'll have the victim again climbing just above you, and you will have your knee kind of up in their crotch. So that way, if they slip or if they start to freak out, you can basically push your weight into that victim to kind of keep them there. So that's what bringing in a conscious victim out typically looks like. An unconscious, oftentimes the victim will be facing you. Again, you're going to have your knee in between their crotch, and then you're going to have your arms underneath both their armpits, and then as you climb down the ladder, their body is just going to continue to follow. As I've already mentioned, victim size plays a big part. With little kids, oftentimes you can just cradle them in your arms and keep both your hands on the beams of the ladder, and then just climb down. It's pretty easy. One thing that this presentation doesn't really touch on is again, the size of victims in terms of if you have a victim that's really heavy. It might be challenging for one firefighter to carry a heavy victim down a ladder themselves. So oftentimes what you can do is actually you can throw 2 ladders up to a window right next to each other, and you can have one firefighter on each ladder, and they can help shoulder the load of bringing that heavier victim down. Sometimes that's what's required. So you kind of have to improvise with the scenario and situation that you have, and be good and ready for it. So quick summary, ground ladders are an essential tool used to access levels above and below ground level. Ground ladders are super important. They save not only victims' lives, but firefighters' lives. And if I can emphasize anything with them, if you are uncomfortable with them in any shape, way, or form, make sure that you get out and you train with them consistently, because the time may come where you show up to a scene and you have somebody that's in need of immediate rescue. The time to figure out how to throw that ladder is not at that moment. You have to be completely comfortable. And again, I said unconsciously competent in working with that ladder in order to be successful on a fire scene, and specifically with a victim rescue. So must know the types of ground ladders your department uses. Again, really get comfortable with the ladders that Timberline utilizes. Must be able to select, carry, and place them to effectively gain access and perform your assigned tasks. Must know the correct methods for safely climbing, working from, and assisting victims down ground ladders. So that does it for my presentation. I'll open it up for questions, and if there are none, I'm not sure. I don't think we're due for a break, but I'll let Captain Johnson decide that, and then I'll hand it over to Mark.
Mark, we can start up right away as soon as you're ready. If that works for you.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you good.
Okay. I had a nuclear explosion of IT issues earlier, so I apologize for everyone for the test that I must have been doing like an asshole. All right. All right. Is somebody able to see my full screen presentation?
Yes. Looks
All
good.
right, cool. Captain McCann, great presentation. It's like yesterday. I remember you teaching my academy many years ago. So I think he did a really good job of talking about a lot of the didactic portion of the presentation in the chapter. When he was going through his presentation, I was on what I think is the Grim Reaper of testing. So like we talked about when I was with you guys last time, Flash Fire closely follows your in-test or your in-person, well, I guess you're not in person, but your target solutions test bank. And an example of some questions you may see on the test, and also if you have the Flash Fire app would sound something like this. The average windowsill height in a residential house is how many feet off the ground or off the floor? 2 feet, 2.5 feet, 3 feet, or 4 feet? The answer to that is 3 feet, for example. Another question may sound like this. When trying to attempt a rescue of a second floor window, what length of ladder is most preferred? 10 to 14 feet, 12 to 16 feet, 20 to 28 feet, or 28 to 35 feet? The correct answer there would be 20 to 28 feet. So that just gives you a little example of how granular some of these questions can be and why it's so important to read between the lines of your chapters as you guys continue to look into your books and kind of get some of that information out of them. So, you know, when you continue on with your readings, as you probably remember from high school and then going to college, for every 1 hour of lecture, we kind of recommend 2 hours of book work. So, you know, if you're getting 2.5 hours of lecture time or 3 hours of lecture time on ladders, you probably need to be in your book, you know, 4 to 5 hours minimum to really get good at your test questions. So I appreciate that, Cap, and I'll ask you to go ahead and unmute yourself at any point if you've got some things to say to me. I was trying earlier to get the audio to play, and Chief Bond just let me know that that's not going to happen tonight. So I am going to graze over a couple videos. With that too, I'm not super familiar with GoToMeeting in terms of how quality video streaming is through it. On the other brand that I use for my other department, it works very well. So it may look choppy here, and if it does, I'll do my best to freeze it when we're talking about technique. For this next presentation, which you know, we've got about an hour, it may go just a few minutes over. I'll make sure and be respectful of your time, but it is super important. Like I mentioned earlier, ladders is one of the longer and probably more prestigious chapters inside of the Fire One book, if you will. A lot of times with my full-time job, I talk about the 5 primary skills that a fireman should really obtain if you want to be considered a good firefighter in the American Fire Service today. And those 5 skills are fire attack, search, ladders, forcible entry, and ventilation. Obviously, within the fire service and the American Fire Service today, we have a lot of skills that we ask you to do, whether that be extrication or wildland, hazmat, smoke and odor calls. There's such a wide variety, but when you get down to the brass tacks of what we're meant to do in terms of fighting fire, those are kind of the 5 skills. So ladders are really near and dear to me. Just a quick story. When I first started in the fire service, we had a homegrown academy at Fort Lupton, and I remember the first day we threw 24s for about 2 hours, and then we went and did some practical or some in-class lessons, and then we went back out and threw 35s. And it was much like many fall days in the Weld County flatlands. It was pretty windy in the afternoon with the front coming through, and we probably got 10 or 12 mile an hour gust, and we had a 35-foot at extension with 3 members on it, and we dang near lost the ladder. And I was, as silly as this sounds, I was pretty traumatized by the experience. And so for about a year and a half or 2 years, like I absolutely feared, like legitimately feared the day I would have to throw a ladder, whether it's on training or structure fire or whatever the case was. So about that time, I was like, man, I am an idiot if I think I'm calling myself a good firefighter and I'm terrified to throw a ladder. So I went to every ladders course at my disposal in the area, did a lot of study, and then got super medieval on myself and started like going out in the bays and throwing ladders inside the bays, like working from shoulder to target, shoulder to target, shoulder to target to raise, and would do that for hours until I got good at them, or at least what I thought was good. So I appreciate what Captain McCann said earlier, which is for some of you, it's going to be really intimidating to throw a 24 for your first time, but it's going to get easier. And a lot of the instructors you'll have in the academy when we, God willing, go to live training are really good. Captain McCann, if he comes out, Avery Johnson, Tommy, Chief Bondus, really good members that can show you how to throw ladders. This presentation, I'm going to take you to the fringes of probably what's appropriate to be teaching to Fire 1. But the reason I'm doing that is because I want to show you the dangers of ladders if you're not good at them, and to the utter importance of being good at deploying simple straight ladders and extension ladders specifically for our department. And then I think at the end we're gonna show you some scenarios, and hopefully that will close out the night, and we'll have some a little bit of conversation with some ideas there. Oh shoot, I got the donut of thinking. All right, we're gonna skip this. Well, actually, I'll just play it for a brief second. So Captain McCann talked about San Francisco Fire as being one of the preeminent fire departments on the West Coast that still maintain wooden ladders. Here's a picture of the San Francisco Ladder Company. There's Jerry Lee. He's one of the hands at the San Francisco Ladder Shop. What's really cool is a lot of the ladders that were in service in the 1920s are still in service today. In fact, the oldest ladder still in service as of this video, which was just a couple of years ago, was 1918, I believe. They make them out of Douglas fir, and then a lot of times the rungs are made out of hickory, and they're exceptionally heavy. A test question you may see is, why do fire departments, especially some pretty progressive fire departments, still use wood ladders? There's a lot of benefits to them. One is they retain strength when they're exposed to heat, and they do that by using certain varnishes on them, as well as aging the wood for about 15 to 20 years before they put them into the build shop. Another reason is, and more pragmatic, especially in the more industrial era of the West Coast, like San Francisco and the Central Valley with Los Angeles, is a lot of the electrical infrastructure is super old there. So there's a lot of opportunities for firefighters to get caught in the streams, if you will, of exposed electric wiring, especially around houses in the downtown and in more low-income areas. So although they look cool, they're super heavy, but they do protect against electric shock much better than the aluminum ladders. And frankly, we talked about the tertiary style, which is fiberglass. There's just not very many fire departments using fiberglass ladders. the most I've seen them is at super rural apartments that have, you know, less than 5-figure budgets for the year that just can't afford the aluminum ladders, which can range from $1,000 all the way up to $6,000. So really cool. I encourage you to go onto YouTube and just Google San Francisco ladders or Wood Ladders Fire Service, and you'll find this video. It's like been viewed multi-millions of times. It's about 3 or 4 minutes long. Really cool history. So I want to talk about why ladder deployment is so important, especially at Timberline. When I first came to Timberline, it was quite the culture shock to me, coming from Fort Lupton, where we're more of the suburban rural interface, and then versus, you know, that against Timberline, which is the mountain rural interface. You know, in the perfect world, when you arrive on a structure fire that looks like this, you have multiple engine companies and truck companies arriving that can do multiple assignments to kind of check the box and what we call tactical assignments. So that's everything from search and rescue, which means to go inside and try to locate a victim down, to fire control, which is putting water on the fire, to other assignments kind of preliminary to that, which is, you know, checking for extension, controlling utilities, doing a 360, all the things that you're going to learn about soon. What's really important to remember, though, is at Timberline, we have a very limited staff. Oftentimes, a first due truck with an engine probably is going to come with 2, and on a good day 3, followed up by a couple other apparatus with only 1 or 2 people on them. So if you look at this picture, I know you guys haven't done an extensive amount of fire behavior and search and rescue yet, but something should stick out to you, which is the side or the intersect of the building closest to us is on fire, and another good portion of the building is not. And so the old adage was, especially at Timberline, was, well, in these circumstances, we're going to do our best to do a defensive fire attack and kind of hope that there's nobody to be rescued. The grassroots movement and a lot of what the cadre and the newer generations of Timberline members are now saying is, look, we've got a bunch of rooms that are still safe, they're still survivable, they have limited or no smoke conditions inside of them, and so we need to try to target those locations, like on that left corner nearest to the firefighters on the ground level, where you see no smoke conditions. We need to get up there and check that for a survivable space. And if you think about this building, it could be anywhere in Denver. There's a good chance that that left side is most likely a bedroom. And I'm going to talk about arrangement of an occupancy in a minute as it relates to ladders, but that's kind of the mindset. You know, you look at a photo like this and you see huge bodies of fire, but let's talk about what that is, right? Like there was a fire that started in the garage, it extended to the car, which is on fire. But by and large, the majority of the fire you see in here is it's a surface fire, and it's a surface fire on the roof. That's not saying this fire is not incredibly dangerous and can grow very quickly and become very violent with a lot of flash potential. But if you look to the right side of the house, there's nearly no indication of fire. Frankly, you know, Mrs. Smith could be sleeping in her chair on the far right side of the house and not have a clue the rest of the house is on fire. I understand this is only a first floor house, but if you were to add a second floor to that, that's not unrealistic. So we need to be very quick and effective with deploying ground ladders to do what we call targeted search in a very rapid amount of time. And it takes our members being very eloquent and able to deploy ground ladders quickly to affect that rescue. In fact, the argument is, well, if we don't have enough staff to put on a stop on this fire and go interior, we may have enough staff to do targeted search in small occupancies or small rooms, i.e. the single bedroom up in the second floor that has a closed door. I can get in there and get out quick, but I can't put on a fire attack because I only have 3 or 4 people here. And that's really a big change in the American Fire Service that we're learning. And that's why it's so important in our rural district to be good with ground ladders, to be able to do search and look for viable victims and survivable spaces. Here's just another example, the final one here. You know, you look up in the back corner, that's what we call the Bravo Charlie intersect there. And you can see the rooms flashed over. There's probably a partition there between the back of the house and the front of the house where that room's just chugging smoke. by all means and purposes, that right front second floor window is survivable. You know, people like Chief Bondis and Captain Johnson will make decisions on whether we deploy to that area. But if you're on an engine that doesn't have an experienced officer, you've got to be able to look at those scenarios and ask, is there someone that is potentially alive in there? And do I have a quicker means to try to deploy a ground ladder to save them versus trying to deploy a hand line and make my way to the second floor with only 2 members? And when you think about that, oftentimes the risk analysis that we talk about a lot is lower for trying to perform the ground ladder rescue than it is trying to deploy a hand line when we don't have the personnel to staff it. Are there any questions this far about what I'm talking about, or any input from anyone? Okay. So I'm going to play a quick video here. I'll see if it works. And I'm going to start and stop it. Remember, I wish I could show videos of Timberline and Timberline's district, but there's just not a lot of mountain rural districts that have a lot of video. So I'm going to let this play out just briefly here. Hopefully it's not too choppy. I'll pause it as well from time to time so you can get a picture in the event it is choppy for you. But what you should be seeing here is 3 firefighters, one that's kind of haphazardly footing a ladder, followed by the 1 man in the red helmet and the 2 man in his black helmet, and they're going up to try to make a search on this right 3rd floor stairwell or apartment. And you notice here there's a fully involved post-flash apartment room to the left, and there's no major partition between the 2 rooms. You'll also notice it's probably hard for you guys to see with the quality, but most of the members' PPE is not being worn correctly. The captain or lieutenant doesn't have his SCBA fully on. He's not masked up, doesn't have his flash hood on. None of the guys have their gloves on, and they really have a poor choice of tools with them. As they continue up, you can see the black smoke is starting to billow out of the top, and we know from Dave Dotson's smoke reading class, if you haven't watched that, we'll get you the resources to do that. Fast black smoke means hot, flashy fuels. So this is real close to starting to light off. The first member goes over the balcony there, and he gets down. Keep in mind, he doesn't have a helmet, or he doesn't have a hood on, and he doesn't have any SCBA on. You can tell it's real hot. Super uncomfortable for them. So you got to start asking, like, if it's so hot for the firefighters, what's the dude who's potentially inside this place dealing with? And you can see now they got the rescued member. They got a victim down here, an older gentleman that's trying to get rescued. So they eventually get him over. Frail old guy, fortunately, is not a heavy, obese, naked person that you're most common going to see. They finally get him over. You can see his face is fully burned. You can see the firefighter that just came down. He's probably hot. And you can tell this lieutenant or captain, you got a full flash fire. I'd be willing to bet that guy's probably got 2nd and 3rd degree burns on his face and body, and his gear's probably out of service now. So although they committed the rescue and they effected the rescue, chances are that truck company or engine company is probably out of service and they're all going to the hospital. And part of that reason what I'm talking about is just the length of time it took them to perform the rescue, the lack of coordination on the crew. And one thing to remember, and I should have prefaced with this, when we watch videos, I am absolutely not for critiquing videos in terms of being subjective. What we try to do is be objective with it. And the way I kind of talk about that when you watch fire videos is like, if that was our fire department, how would you want people talking about us? And I'm pretty confident these guys, somebody had to post this and probably comment on it. These guys are probably like, man, we want you guys to watch this to see some of the things we could have done better. And that's really what we're talking about here. By all purposes, this is a simple 24-foot or maybe a 28-foot ladder deployment, and you can see how a bunch of small little missteps and small little failures in PPE all the way to deployment to not having it footed properly. They're just trusting this handicap sign to foot it against the one rung there, man, there's a lot that could have went wrong there. So we really want to talk about the details of deploying ladders as we lean into practical application coming up here in the next month or so. So this class was taken from Irons and Ladders, Practical Ladders class. They're kind of the preeminent guys, and fortunately they're out of Colorado Springs, so they're local to us. As you guys know, Avery Johnson actually serves from time to time on Truck 8 with the guys who wrote the book on ladder deployment. So he's not on Truck 8 right now, but he does moonlight there from time to time. And so he's a really good resource to reach out to about deploying ground ladders. You know, we really want to emphasize here that, you know, when you listen to Captain McCann's previous presentation, a lot of that was very slow and monotonous and got into the weeds about proper use and technique. But unfortunately, the ISTA manuals really don't stay progressive and align with the current tactics we're asking you to do. It takes them about 5 to 10 years to catch up to where we are now. So I do want to highlight that. And for the testing purposes, I mean, you've got to read the book and you've got to be able to recite that stuff to pass the test. But there's also application, which it's really important. We try to stay on the more progressive edge of that versus being more archaic just because it's what was taught in the book. And a good example of that is tying off the halyard, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So there's two primary reasons that we deploy ladders on the fireground. When we talk about them, we're referring to the citizenry, to our stakeholders, to the Mr. and Mrs. Smith that's out there depending on us. That's to complete primary search, to complete rescue, and a means of occupancy egress. So although there may not be a victim presented at the window, we don't know if there might be somebody unconscious or nearly unconscious that gets their second wind and then tries to bang on the window, and lo and behold, we're in a rescue situation. At Timberline, we're resource deprived oftentimes, so it's not like we're getting 5 truck companies there on a first alarm and throwing 15 or 20 ladders to every window. We may only have 2 or 4 ladders at our disposal for the entire duration of the fire call. So we need to be very intelligent and very intentional with where we place those ladders. Another reason we deploy ladders is for firefighter egress. So if we arrive on scene and we say the building is unoccupied, but then we go in on an offensive fire attack, the building's now occupied. And so we need to treat the building as if it had 15 people in it. It may only have 2 firefighters, but we need to try to provide as many secondary egress points via ladder that we can. And you can see here, this is a training video, and this is an example of that side-by-side or tandem ladder package that Captain McCann talked about earlier. Whenever available, tandem ladder packages are really convenient. So you can see 2 firefighters side by side, being able to lower the firefighter, or in this case, a dummy, down safely. But if you think about like an obese naked person that's at the top of a 2nd or 3rd floor, having that second member there to kind of make light of the work is really convenient. So that's a more of an advanced technique that hopefully we'll get the chance to do during practical application on the fireground. The secondary reason that Captain McCann talked about ventilation, targeted search, although that's arguably similar to doing a rescue, and then rapid intervention crews. So a rapid intervention crew needs to be very, very keen on where the ladders are on the fireground, as well as what ladders they have at their disposal to deploy in the event that they get activated and they need to perform a 2nd floor intervention of a downed firefighter. So I only leave this slide in here to show you what another fire department does. And although we don't run trucks at Timberline, I think it is really important to just recognize that when you arrive on scene, whether you're a paid lieutenant, a senior driver, or a brand new firefighter, it's really important that in the first couple of minutes arriving on scene, you should be expected to know kind of what your assignment is. And if one of your assignments includes ladders or ladder deployment, then it's hard to say how much information you're going to get about where to deploy that ladder, depending on how busy the lieutenant or incident commander is. Sometimes you may arrive on scene as a single engine company with a lieutenant, a driver, and maybe you're in the back seat, and he's like, "Hey, Williams, I need you to deploy the ladder, and you're going to need to decide the best place to deploy it with minimum instruction. Other times you may arrive on scene full well knowing exactly where the ladder needs to be placed and potentially any obstructions or limiting factors that may go into slowing down that deployment well before you get there. That all depends on the tempo and on the experience of the incident commander, which at Timberline can vary greatly depending on who arrives first. Captain McCann talked earlier about the different types of ladders that are in the American Fire Service, with the majority of those being aluminum. Of the aluminum ladders, there's really only 2 companies who make ladders in the United States. Alkalite, which is that top picture that says 35 feet, and then Dual Safety, which has just the NFPA sticker on the bottom there. Alkalites are really common at rural departments. And the reason they're common at rural departments is because they're typically hand-me-down ladders from the 1980s and 1990s, and even the early 2000s, that the more affluent departments have shedded and purchased the the Dual Safeties. The way you primarily indicate, can you guys see my mouse, by the way? Can anyone see my mouse?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the way you can tell a dual or an Alkalite ladder is you see these ribs. That's the best and easiest way. In fact, this is pretty toothy. And if you're not cautious of that and you're throwing an Alkalite all day, you'll start to get bruises where these ribs kind of meet your shoulder blade at. Most of the departments that are affluent, and Timberline is very fortunate to be one of those, we purchased and utilized Dual Safety ladders. So the way you would tell a Dual Safety ladder, they have basically a flat beam. It just looks like a flat sheet of aluminum. There's no ribs on it. They're supremely light. They are neutral balanced, which means they can actually, on a flat piece of concrete, extended or bedded, they can actually balance straight up and down, which is pretty cool to see. They also have what's called interchannel construction. So I couldn't find a good photo, but essentially on the inside of the ladder beam, the channel that holds the fly section to the beam section has 2 points of contact, versus an Alkalite, it's all on a concave engineering method, if you will. So there's only a single interior channel there. And what that means is the Dual Safeties yield about 30% more strength than an Alkalite does on a fly-in arrangement, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Remember, for testing purposes and for JPR purposes, fly-out is the appropriate arrangement for a ladder to be thrown. However, in an emergent rescue situation where time's against you, either way the ladder is thrown is okay to conduct a viable known rescue. So we talk a lot, and you're going to hear this through Academy, especially with our cadre instructors. We talk about a combat-ready ladder. A combat-ready ladder typically has a few indicators that let you know it's combat-ready. One is its balance point should be clearly marked. I'll be on shift this weekend, and so ahead of this, I had planned to mark the balance points on engine 55. And that's really just a way to indicate where the center balance point when you shoulder the ladder is without having to count rungs like they're going to talk about in a video coming up here. The second part of that is, and most of our ladders are already this way up at Timberline, the halyard is actually tied to the bottom rung with a clove hitch and an overhand knot permanently. And it's really difficult to show you what that means. I'll show you a video in here in just a minute, but that takes out the middleman of having to tie some archaic clove hitch with a double overhand knot, because that's what the IFSTA manual tells you to do. Essentially, the ladder is kept in a deployable position as it rides on the engine. So when you get on scene, you just essentially extend the ladder, and then there's nothing to do with the halyard, unlike the previous model, which was you would have to tie it off for safety at the end. Depending on the amount of slack that remains in the halyard once you deploy or extend the ladder to full length, there's quite a substantial amount there. So the way we kind of address that is, if you're in an imminent rescue, we ask you to forego tying the knot. But if you're doing something more administrative, like throwing it in training or throwing it to the ladder or throwing it to a secondary egress point that doesn't really have an imminent rescue, we do ask you to continue tying off that additional piece of halyard as an added safety feature in the event that the ladder should fail. So you can see here, you can see the clove hitch. It doesn't have an overhand on this one. This is an example of a combat ladder. So it's tied off at the bottom, and all you would do is you would basically pull down towards this clove hitch, and that would raise the ladder. And so you can imagine when you do that, this fly step section extends and you get slack out of the halyard. So that's kind of what I was referring to earlier, and you can see the slack is draping over this Truck 7 ladder, and I'll have a video to show you in a minute. I'm gonna just briefly go over this slide. When this first came out, it was really a grassroots movement talking about fly in and fly out. IFSTA is kind of like the Bible when it comes to education in the fire service. And fortunately or unfortunately, we have to abide by it because it's who sets our standards. IFSTA is very, very prominent in stating that fly in ladder deployment is unacceptable. And so some pretty prestigious firefighters kind of went to the manufacturers and were like, look, guys, is this BS or is this true? And this document here just kind of explains that although they don't necessarily say it outright, they're basically indicating that there's only 4% less chance of safety with the fly out position versus the fly in position. And so it's just kind of a validation that a lot of that was unfounded, and it's just based off of what we've done in the past because that's what we've always done. So again, I'm reminding you, for testing purposes, fly out, meaning the fly section that extends should be out towards you climbing the ladder. However, in imminent rescue situations, fly in is also okay depending on how the ladder falls against the structure. You can see here, here's a member that's performing a rescue of a guy. We've got different ladders in the American Fire Service. At Timberline, we have 2 ladders. We've got the 14-foot extension and we've got the 24-foot extension. You'll notice there too that a 24-foot extension by Alcolite or Dual Safety weighs 28 pounds. And Alcolite, i.e. the one that had those ribbed, the ribbed section, that's 35 pounds. So quite a significant increase of weight. Same thing down here. A Dual Safety, the newer ones that we carry weigh 72 pounds, and other departments that we may play mutual aid with have Alcolites, and they can be 75 pounds. So although 3 pounds doesn't sound like a whole lot, when you start getting pretty good with ladders, you'll see that that extra 3 pounds isn't a lot of weight, but it changes the way the ladder balances and throws on your body. So you know, I'd encourage you to try to get out to regional training opportunities where they have ladder classes to be able to experience the different type of companies that produce the ladders that we're going to throw. But just to remind you, at Timberline, all of our ladders we deploy are Dual Safety. So you look right here, I'm not asking you, and this isn't testable, but we talked about a single ladder or a straight ladder, often known as a roof ladder. You're going to find that most of the time a 14-foot straight ladder or roof ladder beds at the same length as a 24-foot extension ladder. So if you've been on engine 55 or 54 or whatever, you'll notice that the ladders are the same length, and that's because they're designed to fit nice and snug on an engine. A lot of times a 14-foot ladder on a fairly traditional or a conventional constructed house up in Timberline's district will reach the second floor. When you start getting into houses built before the 1970s, and then some of the super brand new houses, which I'm going to show you a couple pictures of, all bets are off. So my stance on it is, if you're going to deploy a ground ladder in what I call with your virgin eyes, meaning you don't have a good situational awareness or arrangement of the house you're about to deploy a ground ladder on, you want the best weapon for the fight. So I really encourage that first ladder that you deploy, if you can only do one because that's all you're experienced with doing, is to start with your 24 and then work down to your 14 from there. versus going with your 14 to the virgin side of the house you haven't seen and found out the ladder is too short. So think of it like a gun. You want the best gun for the gunfight. And in Timberline's district, that's the 24-foot extension ladder, which is 72 pounds. And I know that sounds like a lot if you think about a bag of sand on your shoulders and trying to carry that for 20 miles or whatever the case is. I guess a lot of you wouldn't do that because you weren't in the military, but it was real stupid times for me. It's really not that bad. 72 pounds over 14 feet is actually quite light, believe it or not. So there's some terms that I just want to talk about real quick. The first one's called controlling the tip. We're going to watch a few videos here that I'll just I'll voice over, and I'll refer to controlling the tip. And what we're talking about here is your ability to lay the ladder tips or the top of the ladder into the structure softly. And the reason we want to get skilled at that is the last thing we want to do is not control the tips or be a little unruly with our tips. And then we crash into a window. Not only is that damage to the house if it doesn't need to be damaged, but second, that can start to really create a flow path or a insurgence of air into the house that can become unstable and grow the fire. So we really don't want to crash those tips into the house unless we're being intentional for a specific reason. The second term is called shooting ladders. This is somewhat of a more advanced technique, but if you just kind of imagine with me, say you have a house that's just draw yourself like a house on a prairie, doesn't matter how it looks, and then real close to one of the sides of the house you have like a low-hanging electrical line, and that electrical line doesn't allow you to drop the ladder in traditionally. So what you have to do is actually bring the ladder up between the electric line and the house. That's called shooting the ladders. And I'm not sure where Captain Johnson is right now in terms of like rolling his eyes or agreeing with me. But the problem with that is up at Timberline, we have an inordinate amount of electrical lines that run parallel to buildings, especially at residents that have really shoddy electrical code. And so shooting ladders is really important for a basic firefighter to do. And I'll just ask that we practice that during our practical application period, because you'll probably experience that more up at Timberline than someone like myself or Stoughton would, more in the suburban area down in the Weld County area. Moving ladders, so that's it. Oh yeah, I bet you've been doing it all night.
I think my experience has been the second part of that, the limited space, which once you get proficient or even just get things down, when we give you a little bit of a confined area to maneuver a ladder in, because there's 4, tinker cars that people are working on, or there's, a shed built real close to the house, or there's a Connex box next to the house. It provides a challenge, and that could be, like I said, anything from an immovable object to just snow load that's on the side of a building. It can be challenging. So practice is definitely the way to get around that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and we're going to have some pictures at the end that will talk about that. So thank you, Cap. Moving a ladder is really the term for moving a ladder from one window to the next window, really in the arrangement of it being, if you imagine yourself sitting in front of a second floor house and you're looking up at the bedrooms on the second floor, it's maybe 10 or 12 feet between each window. There's ways of moving ladders very easily and conveniently that is safe in that short amount of time, that doesn't require you to drop the ladder down to replace it physically. Parallel moves is a little bit more advanced technique. And again, like I told you, I'm taking you to the fringes of what we're going to expect you to do in Fire 1. But that's moving a significant distance with the ladder extended or partially extended. Primarily, that would be used for areas like apartment buildings where and we don't have a lot in Timberline, but Central City and Blackhawk do, where you have multiple windows on the same floor that need to be moved quickly and performed with targeted search effectively. It's a very simple, easy move. It's called a painter's carry. It's one of the easiest moves to do once you learn the balance points. We may or may not get into it in Academy, but I present it to you because if you don't hear it from someone, you won't know about it. And so that's kind of my stance on bringing it up in this Academy. The final thing I'll talk about is called drop and go, and that is, in my mind, one of the most precious nuggets of deployment of a ground ladder that you can utilize at a limited staff district. Effectively, if you imagine yourself being pretty proficient with being able to shoulder carry a 24 and suitcase carry a 14, so you've got one on your shoulder and you're carrying one on your arm, and you're going around to the corner of the house, and you realize that you've got a viable victim out the Charlie side or the back of the house, you essentially drop the most inefficient or least effective ladder on the intersect or on the corner of the house for someone else to pick up, and you directly go to that window to perform the rescue. When you create that standard of drop and go on an intersection of a corner, that creates a consistent location for people to expect to see ladders. I understand that could create a trip hazard, but remember, the reason we're dropping ladders in the first place is because we have a viable victim somewhere at the house. And we'll talk about that more in practical application later in the season. So I'm going to show you a quick video here. Again, the music's not going to play, and I'll pause it when we get a chance. So this is like your most rudimentary throw of a 24, and it shows it to you from a couple different packagings of where they're at in the truck. In this case, this is a flat bedded 24-foot extension ladder out of the ass end of an engine, and this is what's called tromboning. So if you notice there, let me just go back. He's basically tromboning up the ladder to choke up on it to be able to pick it up onto his shoulder. And then he hikes it up on his shoulder and it continues. All right, that's literally the most basic method of being able to arm yourself with the ladder that we'll be teaching you in Academy. That's called tromboning. You'll see it again here from a slightly different engine compartment. This is like what we would use in Fort Lupton. We don't have this at Timberline. Basically, it just comes out the ass end of the engine and straight onto the shoulder. So he doesn't need to trombone the ladder because it's already at shoulder height. As he continues, you'll basically notice he's got his shoulder on what we call the balance point, which is the center of the 24-foot extension, which is about the 5th run. So what he's going to do now is it's called plant and spike. So basically what he's going to do with a single person throw, just to give you some continuity or some, I guess some meat to chew on for the night about what these should look like. Again, this is the most basic form. He's basically just going to step forward, and then he's going to drop the tip closest to his body down. You can see right there. So he just dropped the tip down on the ground and then kind of hiked up on the ladder, and that threw it up. He made it look easy, and for many of you who aren't or who are like me and very uncoordinated, that's going to take you quite a bit of practice to be able to do that so easily. But once the ladder's up, you'll notice this single firefighter can pivot the ladder very easily. I fully agree with Captain McCann that there's not a whole lot of reasons that we need to be in the business of having 2 people pivot a ladder, especially at a limited staff department like ours. You'll also see their ladder is tied in a combat ready system. So you notice all this excess of slack that's been created. In my experience with the combat ready ladders, it is firefighters who don't manage this slack that usually find the ladder on the ground when they least expect it. It can get caught on a knee, on your ankle, on your wrist like this, or on your SCBA or different types of equipment that you're carrying with you. So it's really important that you manage that slack. And if I'm fortunate enough to teach you a practical portion for ladders, I'll show you how to do that using a bite of rope in your hand. But that will bite you in the butt if you're not watching out for that when you're deploying these ground ladders. So he finally sets his ladder in. He ties off his excess. And again, we would ask you to do this for a non-essential task like just deploying for a secondary means of egress or potentially for roof operations. You may not be asked to tie it off because you're rescuing someone from a second floor. And then now what he's going to do is rotate it so it's fly out. And then he's going to back the ladder up so it's at the proper climbing height. That's effectively what you're going to do for your testing in Firefighter 1 to pass that JPR, Job Performance Review. Here's a little bit more advanced of a basic throw with some really cool digital effects. It's from Ben Fire out in the northwest. So you'll see this guy has more of what we see. We have the hydraulic swing arm ladder carriage that will come down. That's exactly what we have here. He drops the ladder down. He's going to get the 14 foot, I think, off and put it on the ground. Oh no, I'm sorry, they have it on the outside. So at Timberline, our 14's on the outside and our 24's on the inside. So he's going to bring the ladder around, and much like the previous member, you can see he's just about to hike up with his body to get that tip down onto the cement. I call that targeting the rung, or I'm sorry, targeting the beam. So he's probably got a target right about where my mouse cursor is, and he's basically going to hop up and kind of set that thing down on the ground. Oh, I was a little off. So it's probably going to be right about here. There you go. So that's the hop. That's the plant and spike, as it's called. So now what he does is Captain McCann was talking about earlier, he's footing the ladder. So you notice his right foot is planted against the foot of the ladder, and he's got his knee against the outside of the bedded section. And now he's basically raising the extended section up. You'll notice that the ladder is slightly on an incline towards him, and his elbows and his arms are carrying the weight of the extension ladder as it raises higher in the sky. And this is about the point in time right about here where your butt's going to be puckering because you feel about 2 to 3 miles an hour wind, and you're like, oh shit, I'm about to drop a $2,000 ladder onto 3 people and break all their heads open. But have some faith in your instructors. That's a very normal feeling to have when you first get into these ladders that are now 24 feet up, or roughly 5 to 6 times your height. It's real unruly at first, but you'll get more comfortable with them. And then he's going to gently set the ladder down, which is controlling the tips. Notice all this excess of slack you can see there. Again, that's a big hazard point if you're not managing it. And then he's going to check his climbing angle. All right, this is the last video. So we're going to go a little bit over 8:30. Sorry guys. So I just want to show you the end here. This is a real craftsman of the job. I'm not going to speak much about his technique today because it takes a lot of time, but I just want you to see how eloquent and how quickly he moves. Man, that is cooking with butter and garlic. So you notice there, he did actually what's called a muscle up technique. Real just smooth. He's basically moving a 72-pound ladder around like it weighs 5 ounces. Very, very, very quick, effective moves. I'm hoping by the end of Academy, a lot of you who want to put in the work will be at that point. So take my word for it. It doesn't take you long to kind of learn how to deploy ladders fairly quickly and be pretty effective, especially at our department where we only have 2 options, which is a 14-foot or 24-foot extension. To foot or not foot a ladder. So hopefully you can see this. This is a pretty famous video of when things go wrong. Let's see here. So you can see here we've got 2 firefighters in Canada. The reason they're even up there is debatable, but you can notice at this point, snow on the ground, ice on the ground, 2 firefighters up, nobody footing the ladder. The guy's trying to make cuts there. Still nobody's footing the ladder. You've got a couple chiefs inside the garage doing chiefy things, along with this chief doing chiefy things. And then eventually, you know, the expected is going to happen. The ladder's going to fall out from below them, and most likely injury is going to ensue. So you can see right there, that's the dangers of not footing a ladder, especially in positions where you know there's slick or potentially icy material. And up in Timberline in the mountain rural community, that's probably 6 months out of the year. So we really need to be footing ladders as much as possible. Conversely, however, there are appropriate times when you may not foot a ladder. And this at times can be very questionable, especially with chiefs or with training officers or whomever. And that's not calling out chief, any chief at our department or Chief Johnson or Chief Bondus or anything like that, but that's just the way it is. But you notice here quite a different arrangement of soil. It's just grass and soil. When you take the feet of a ladder and you dig it into the earth, there is almost no chance of the ladder losing its footing. So again, the disclaimer here is I'm not encouraging anyone to not foot the ladder, but if you have an imminent rescue and nobody else around you and you're in very soft grass or 4 inches of thick mud or 6 inches of snow that's pretty hard packed and your gut tells you it's a pretty bomb-proof footing and you have to make a rescue, I don't think anyone's going to tell you you have to wait 5 minutes for someone to come rescue you so that you can go rescue someone else. Again, for academy's purposes and testing, you always need to have a footer. But again, like I said before, if I'm not telling it to you now, you may not hear it for a while. It is absolutely appropriate to not have a footer under very emergent conditions when you have a stable soil package like this with just grass and some soft dirt below it. All right, so we're almost near the end here, and this is kind of where I'd like to get Captain McCann or anyone else on the horn that wants to chime in. So what I want to do real quick, and we're going to go a few minutes over, but I'd like to play a little game with you. So I think it's really important to recognize that, I bet I lost everything I had up too. Gosh darn it. That's okay, we'll do this together. Are you guys able to see my browser?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm going to do real quick, I want to talk about mapping out a structure and why that's important. By the way, if I was in the business of looking for a house in Timberlines District, I would sure be looking for the one that I can't find now. This bad boy that's pending, 365,000, man, that is beautiful.
Actually,
So,
I think we can only see your PowerPoint, not your browser. I'm sorry.
Okay, let me see if I can change that real quick.
Now we got it.
Okay, so let's play a little game here. Feel free to chime in, anyone who wants to. You know, the thing about being able to throw ladders fairly good is you have to be good at mapping out the interior of a structure before you deploy a ground ladder, and unfortunately you can't see the inside while you're deploying a ground ladder. The cool thing is you don't need a whole lot of experience to be able to map out a structure. And the reason for that is everyone has been in so many houses throughout your life that you just know what's inside. There are some exceptions and outliers, but I guess the first question I'll pose is, this is up in Gilpin County. This is this is obvious. This is new construction. So if you look up at these 3 windows up here on the alpha side, and you're welcome to chime in here, does anyone think that these are bedroom windows or a livable space?
I'd say maybe the top one is a bedroom, but the others might be like staircases.
Got it. So potential staircases here and here, potential living area up here. How about these small windows on the side, these vent windows? Are those livable spaces or access to a livable space? What do you guys think these are?
Just letting daylight in.
Yeah, just skylights, right? So if you look at the inside of the house here, there's those windows. So this is the front door is to our right. These 3 windows are just skylights. And if you think about a lot of Gilpin County residents, a lot of them that have vaulted ceilings are typically going to have an open area towards the front or alpha side of the house with livable spaces on the Charlie side. So it's not until, let's see if I got another picture over here. If you look up here, this is 1,200 square foot, basically cabin. It's probably an Airbnb, or was once. The only livable space is on the Charlie side with access from the back of the house. And you'll see there's a living area up there with a bedroom right here. So when you look at the front of the house, you're like, man, there's a ton of windows that I might have to target. But if you really think about it, you kind of like visually close your eyes and walk through the front door, what are you going to see? Chances are you're not going to have a living space in most of these structures. In fact, a lot of timberline has A-frame construction with a very, very similar arrangement where the front towards the front door is open living with a loft in the rear. So chances are in those style of houses, you may consider just trying to target the Charlie side before you walk in. Chief Bondage, you've lived up in the area for a while. Do you have any comments on that?
What's up, please? No, I want to know where that house is and how much it's going for. That place is beautiful.
Dude, 365, it's off Gap Road.
Dude, I can't afford that. You know that.
Oh man, yeah, you can. Stop buying guns.
I don't buy guns, I build guns.
All right, so here you can see a 3,000 square foot, probably affluent living vacation house. Pretty obvious. Does anyone think these are living spaces up here are accessible to bedrooms? These small 1x1 or 2x2 windows?
Not likely.
Okay, what about this window over the front door? What is that? If we were to break that and step into that, what are we going to fall into?
Foyer.
Okay, it could be a foyer, could be potentially a balcony, or it could be open space open to the stairwell. How about over the garage? Any recruits? Any idea what we might fall into in the garage area?
Possibly storage.
Okay, so over the garage like
bedroom.
this, yeah, totally. So it's 50-50, especially at these more affluent houses. Chances are a lot of these are going to be rental spaces that need to maximize square footage for people to sleep in. There's a good chance this is a master bedroom or a mother-in-law bedroom with a full kitchen in it. This could be a completely separate living space from this. It also could be a really rich lawyer's like den. You know what I mean? So it just kind of depends. There's not a lot of pictures around the 360 here, but when you get inside, I just want to make mention. Let me just take you upstairs here. So you'll see upstairs, common. This is not common. These are an indication of a semi-custom or full custom house, which they're lower than 3 foot, which is typical code for windowsills. These are about 1.5 to 2 feet. That is not common. When you're conducting rescues, these are a lot easier to lift up a heavy body up and over than the 3 foot or potentially a 4 foot windowsill. So that is an advantage working towards you. Here's the window over the garage. Check that out. This is a full Airbnb style living area. Check that out. So what might arrange or look like just a really rich person's house that has 5 people may have 20, 25 people living in it at one time. And even more of the reason that we need to be cautious about what we're getting ourselves into when we deploy ground ladders. Let me do one more real quick if I can find it. Somebody might, here's the final one. So this is a really common arrangement up at Timberline. This is called a tri-level house or a bi-level house. We actually call this garden level. So down where my cursor is, that's the garden level. And why that's important when we deploy ground ladders is anytime we have a garden level arrangement, meaning the window on the bottom floor is pretty much equal or just a few feet above mineral soil, is that basically compresses down our length of ladders that we need by 1/3. So typically when a 24-foot extension ladder will easily meet the second floor, in this case, a 14-foot will absolutely meet the second floor, and a 24-foot will absolutely meet the roof. In fact, you'll probably have 3 to 5 rungs over that roof. We have a lot of these in our district, so that's really good for us. When we see a garden level house, we should be thinking, man, we've got a lot of wiggle room with our 24-foot extension ladder. Question for somebody who who might be willing to answer this. If I walk inside this first floor, inside the door, and I'm standing directly inside the threshold, what am I going to be looking at?
Stairs. Stairs.
I heard stairs. Anyone
Yeah.
else? Okay. Okay. You think I'm going to be looking at a kitchen? Okay.
Some sort of living room.
Okay. What about this room right here? The one on the right side on the second level.
I'd say that one would be a kitchen, probably.
Okay, kitchen. What about this side?
Living space.
Let's check it out. So this window is facing towards the garage. So this room, the living room, is this window. All right. This doorway right here is this area. So this is a little foyer area. As you guys said, you'd probably be looking at stairs. And what you can't see very well is over to the right. I don't know if I can move it here. I guess I can't. It's hidden. Sorry, guys. Maybe not. Over here is an office. So a really important thing to remember about bi-level houses, as a rule, is living spaces, common living spaces are almost always towards the garage, and bedrooms are almost always away from the garage. So the reason that's important, right? You arrive on an engine and the lieutenant's like, I need you to go set up for rescue for a possible victim. You shouldn't be thinking the room closest, as a rule, closest to the garage. You need to be thinking this window or potentially the two windows on the back side. Questions on that? All right, we're almost done here. Let me go ahead and screen share one more thing. All right, Captain McCann, would you, this is your first time seeing this, I think, maybe second time. Would you mind going over some hazards you see in this picture in terms of like ladder deployment? If you were an engine company lieutenant or captain, what are some concerns you might have for deploying ladders?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, this is a little different for me because typically we don't have these houses in the area where I work at. So just kind of looking at it, in terms of ladder deployment, one, I kind of what I'm doing here with my eyes is I'm just starting starting at the bottom and then just kind of working my way up with the structure. And so looking around first at the topography that the house sits on. Obviously, it looks like it's on some type of mountainside or hillside. And so if I needed to throw any type of ladder against or to this building, a good solid kind of footing to foot my ladder is probably going to be a concern. So that's my first concern there. And then kind of working my way up, obviously, if we're going to be arriving on we'll be arriving on what I would call the alpha side of this structure down the driveway, it appears that this building or this house is going to have what looks to be a walkout basement. So initially, I know that if I have to make let's say a victim rescue from a third floor window on either what would be the Bravo or Charlie side, the looks can be deceiving from the alpha side of the house. So I'm going to need probably a longer length of ladder than I would on, let's say, the alpha or delta side. And I think the last thing I'll add was just I guess the symmetry of the roof. Obviously, you have kind of multiple roof levels and multiple pitches that might make it challenging depending on where you throw your ladder to obtain roof access. So those are kind of the three big things that at least I see initially upon looking at this.
Yeah, totally. If you look here, so you see you got a down slope right here, right? So what looks like a third floor on the front of the building only appears to be a second floor. So that deployment is not, we can't deploy in Timberline's district with that height, right? That's a 28-foot ladder deployment. So That's a very quick indication to say, okay, if I can't deploy a ground ladder to what is actually the second floor, although it looks like the third floor on the Charlie side, we have to make an interior search or potentially commit crews inside the structure more than just doing a ladder rescue. That's a great point, Cap. Chief Bondus, this is not in our district. This is obviously in Central City. All of these pictures you're going to look at are all within a legitimate response area to us. What's your concerns you might have for deploying ladders here?
First of all, the construction of the house. I mean, that thing's going to be ripping when we get there. You know, the C side of the building's definitely going to be at a lower grade than the A side. So if we throw ladders to the A side, we're not going to be making a whole lot of gain. I can't really see up in the loft space, but I'm guessing it's maybe one story on the front side there on the A side.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. So Chief talks about extension, right? Like if this thing's started a fire, it's going to be a tinderbox. He's absolutely correct. But the thing to remember is if it's a tinderbox, what can all burn? This path of egress. And on the Charlie side, I bet what you're willing to see is there's probably a very nominal backyard, if any backyard. And so probably the only means of egress is out the front. So now the concern is, well, if I've got a well-involved structure with extension into the shed, they may not be able to go out the only stairwell back if the garage in this case, it's over here, the garage is out of play. So that may mean what I never thought I would do in the past is I have to deploy a ground ladder to the first floor patio walkout to rescue someone because this is all on fire and the Bravo side is ripping as well. You know, the other concern I had that Captain Johnson was talking about earlier was this path of ingress, these stairs. If you try to take a ladder up there and you're not cautious of where your ladder's laying on your shoulder, you're going to be bumping into everything. You're going to get your beams jammed up in these, you know, banister rails, if you will. So this is actually where we do probably an overhead or a high shoulder movement. Again, that's not something we can chat about in our presentation, but we can teach you those techniques later. This is an absolute picture perfect example of a confined space entrance to a deployable ladder zone, which may be up here. We did this one already. Check out this A-frame. So as we talked about earlier, guys, this place that I'm highlighting right now, would you agree this is not a livable space? This is all going to be potentially just skylight and open to the living area? Yeah. So check this out, like Cap was talking earlier, the reason I did this, check out the snow mound, right? Go straight into this car. I've got less than probably 12 inches of maneuverability in here. There's another asshole pipe back here, which means I've got about 6 inches on this side. And then I've got a snow drift that's between this car. So my only path of ingress is either to work in this area or potentially go down and all the way around. For anyone who's snowshoed in the past, you know that's not an easy feat. And then throw in the fact you don't have snowshoes and you've got 200 pounds of gear with your ladder on your shoulder. This is a treacherous job. So what we have to deal with 6 months out of the year with snow and with all these different types of hazards, you've got to be on your game about being intentional with where you deploy ladders, because you ask someone to go downhill and then back uphill in 4 feet of snow and then to find out it's the wrong place, they are done for minutes at a time. So that's why it's so important to be good at throwing ladders. Almost done. I got 2 more slides. Sorry, guys. This is the Mercantile in Rollinsville. This is for sale right now for the low price of $500,000 if you want to buy it. The point I want to make here is this is super common construction defects, right? Look at the undulating edge here. And who knows whether this is supported or not. I gotta think if you were standing on this after your ladder's been thrown, right? So your ladder's looking like this. This is super floppy and super sketch. So in our district, especially a lot of these industrial era houses pre-1940s, really got to be aware of those safety points and the construction load that it could possibly take. You know, I can't think of a reason at all why we would be on the mercantile roof, but there are so many homes in the district that are built like this, super janky, that we just got to be aware of. Final house here, I think. Captain Jay, you got anything to add in here that we haven't talked about?
Hey, Mark, just to chime in on that mercantile building, just to prove like the weirdness of our district, that's actually not a mercantile anymore. It's a duplex. There are 2 livable spaces in that home with a basement that walks out near the train tracks.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, when we talk about, you know, the weird Gilpin County construction, this is a perfect example. Like, we don't know what we're getting into. You could roll up on that first due and see mercantile on the roof and think, oh, it's an unoccupied commercial structure, but there could actually be 2 families living in that space.
Totally, dude. And before that, it was a grow house, if I remember correctly.
Probably a grow house also.
Yeah, it was a grow house. So I mean, that just
this district as well.
It probably still is.
Captain EJ, you got anything to add on a consideration for this arrangement?
Yeah, again, you know, that kind of the walk up area to even get to Bravo and Delta sides of the building. There's lots of gates. There's some railings. There's definitely some slope there, so your access is really limited. This is obviously in the summer. In the winter, it'd be even more treacherous. You know, and some of these windows, you know, right above the garage, those probably are livable space, because I'm seeing a balcony on the Bravo side and a door, so that looks like it would come into a livable space. You know, just the configuration, anything that's built into a mountainside, you're at a disadvantage because your platform is slanted, and that doesn't make it easy to throw a ladder. So you have to get a little bit creative and like Mark says, you really have to kind of think as you're getting off and as you're pulling that ladder and looking at the building and possibly reading smoke. I want to throw my ladder the best place right out of the gate, rather than have to move it or expend all my energy and it not be the right place. So sometimes a little bit of a slow roll before you throw that ladder, really thinking about where I want to be, is your best bet than using all your energy, you know, for something that turns out to be very little gain.
Totally correct there. Actually, I think this is the last one. So this is Central City. This is actually on the fringe of our district. Over here, this is all of our district. And then back on the other side of these structures. So the point of this is, you're like, oh, this is Central City, we would never go here. That is precisely the point we would go here. In fact, on a structure fire there, they're probably going to be asking for us and Blackhawk. We're probably going to be third due on it if Blackhawk gets called early, which tells me Blackhawk in Central City is probably going to be on fire attack and probably doing IC and ICS assignments, which means third due, we're coming in and doing search. So, you know, just to make mention, like, this is what I was talking about earlier, these lateral or parallel movements, right? Like, there's fire coming out of this thing right here, boom, right? And then fire lapping up here, boom. So we're like, well, this is not a livable or this is not a survivable space, but down here certainly is. This window certainly is. This window certainly is. And then we've got smoke starting to churn out here because it's an extension across the attic. So now we're like, man, we've got to really get in here quickly to try to see if there's somebody in there, because they're on the third floor of a common stairwell. You can see how busy this can get really fast in a bad situation with limited resources very quickly, which is all the more reason when you go to the 5 basics that I'm closing on: fire attack, search, ladders, forcible entry, and vent. All of these are so important to the success of the firefighter and the fire company on the structure fire scene. So that kind of concludes our presentation today. You heard from Captain McCann talking about the nomenclature, a lot of the testable questions, talked a lot about the different types of ladders and maintenance of them. And then I kind of give you more of a practical application and what we're going to be expecting out of you really post-graduation day one, should you be in a structure fire situation. And the thing I want to just remind you all of is, don't get apathy in our district or any fire department. You're like, man, we've had 5 structure fires in a year and they've all been fully involved on arrival and 2 fatality fires. Well, if we're having that many fires and that many fatality fires, it's only a matter of time before we get one that has survivable space where our name is on the docket for trying to get somebody out of that situation. So take it to heart when I tell you ladders are so important to the success of survivability inside these structures. I know we went a little bit long. We're at 8:50. So I'd just like to close out with a roundtable of the instructors and the cadre tonight. Captain McCann, do you have any closing thoughts?
None in particular. I hope that you guys all got something out of this this evening. Again, ground ladders are so important, and it's really important for us to be proficient with their use on an incident scene. And like I said before, the time to figure it out is not on the incident scene. So really dedicate some time to even, past academy, after you graduated, just to continue to work on ladders, so that way you can maintain your proficiency and get better at it every time you train on it. But again, they're so important not only for the lives of our potential victims and the people that we protect, but also they are very important to our lives as firefighters. A well-placed ladder in a room that's about to flash over, giving the firefighters that are potentially in that room a chance to make it out of that structure safely, is absolutely important. So that's really all I have. Thank you.
Chief or Cap?
Yeah, I just, like to add that, ladders is a fun part of the job, and you saw how easy it was to pull up some real estate sites and play what if games and look at different layouts and then be able to look inside the building and see if your guesses were right. But you can do that in your neighborhood down in town, whether it's, on the Front Range or up in Gilpin County. And it also reiterates, this lesson reiterates why it's important to learn your district, no matter where you end up in the fire service. Driving around with your crew and talking about ladders or talking about access or, forcible entry doors. We may go to this apartment complex because Central City is already on another call. We may go there for a medical. And that's a great opportunity to look inside the building and just see what the layout is like and what the window configuration is like and how to get some ladders around. So you can fold ladders into just about anything you do on any given day, and it is definitely something that you can lose your edge with by not throwing a ladder for 4 or 5 months. So, once a month, just go and throw a ladder and have fun with it.
Yeah, I would echo everyone's statements so far and kind of add in, when we're on shift and doing truck checks, we have the fancy robot ladder arms that come off the trucks. Pulling the robot arm down is not doing a check on your ladders. ask your lieutenant when you're on shift to take the ladders off and throw some ladders, get reps on them. I know that speaking for myself, I don't get enough reps on it, and every time I pull a ladder, it's always a 30-second of like, oh shit, what am I doing? So pull them off, throw them, get proficient with them, because they really are. They're a lifeline, as Captain McCann said, they're a lifeline to our potential victims as well as our brothers and sisters. So throw them against the station. I'll take all the heat for whatever paint or gutters you ruin. But get reps on them, get proficient with them. When we are actually able to meet in human form again, we'll get a lot of practice with this. But ladders are super fun, and you guys all had a real cool opportunity to learn from two very professional firemen tonight. So I hope this was an exciting lecture, and I'm excited to show you how bad I am at throwing ladders when we get to see each other face to face again.
I guess they have like
Yeah, while I got you real quick, Tom O'Connell just sent this tonight. I don't know if you can see it. So what you're looking at there, that's like a front door that's like weird construction straight into a basement, right? So the point of that is just like, you just don't know what's in the district till you get out there and get your hands dirty. And I loved what Captain Johnson said. The best way to pre-plan your district is to intentionally pre-plan it on medical calls. If you're out on a medical call and you're not sizing up a structure, short of it being a cardiac arrest or a stroke where you got to do work and you're just twiddling your thumbs, like you're wasting time. So appreciate that. So that's the freest chance you have to get training 24/7 on the job, is to just get out there and check out the district, and then get back in the rig and talk about it. Like, yeah, that was a stupid medical call, so we're just going to bitch about it. No, get out there and talk about the structure fire component. Hey, did you notice those bushes in front of this? Did you notice that window and that? That's how you grow as a company, and that's how all of us will get better and earn that experience well before our time, because we're just not running the fire calls we were 40, 50 years ago when you hear about it on the books and in the movies. So that's a great point.